Hi, my name's Venetia. I was 9 when my parents packed a bag for me and drove me to a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere. They said they needed to focus their energy on my twin sister. They didn't die. They didn't move away. They just erased me. Quietly, neatly. But even after a decade of silence, they still used my name, on tax returns, on paperwork, to keep up the story that I never left. Last night, I invited them to dinner. I didn't do it to reconnect. I did it so they could watch the life I built, without them. But what happens when the truth is louder than their version ever was? And what if the name they gave me was never really mine? The knock on the door came right on time, sharp, not hesitant. I didn't rush to answer it. I let the echo roll across the hardwood floors, past the carefully set dining table, past the baby toys in the corner, until it faded into silence. When I finally opened the door, my mother stepped in first, her heels clacking against the tile like she owned the place. My father followed, carrying nothing, not even guilt. They looked around like they had walked into a showroom, not a home. "Is the owner here?" my mother asked, already halfway through the living room. I didn't flinch. I didn't laugh either. "You're in her house," I said. She froze. Her eyes flicked to mine, then back to the framed family photos on the wall. None of them included her. The tension hung heavy, like humid air before a storm. 10 years of silence doesn't fill itself. It hovers between every word, every breath. I didn't invite them here for closure. This wasn't a reunion. This was a reckoning. They took seats at the table without asking. Of course they did. My father cleared his throat, glancing at the meal in front of him, but making no move to touch it. "You've done well for yourself," he offered. That generic tone, as if I'd won a local raffle, not rebuilt a life from scratch. "I get by," I said, folding a napkin, smoothing it once, then again. They glanced at the baby stroller by the stairs. My son was asleep upstairs. I wasn't going to wake him for this. "How long have you lived here?" my mother asked, her tone just shy of polite. "Long enough for it to feel like mine." No one responded. No one needed to. And yet, I could feel them scanning, noticing the details. The framed law degree, the matching chairs, the lack of dust. They were searching for proof of wealth, of independence, of their own absence. That's when the memory hit me. It was Christmas. I was 15. My sister's friends had come to visit from her private prep school. I'd been told to stay out of sight. "Just help your aunt with food," my mother had said. One of the girls spilled juice on the rug and turned to me. "Could you grab a towel, please?" she asked. "You work here, right?" I remember standing there, too stunned to speak. I wasn't in uniform. I wasn't carrying trays. But I guess my presence alone, in that house, with that face, didn't scream, "Daughter." My mother didn't correct her. She didn't say a word. She smiled and turned back to her wine. That was the last party I ever showed up to in their house. Not because I was banned, but because I finally understood I was never invited. I looked across the table now, watching them pretend nothing ever happened. My mother folded her hands neatly in her lap. My father checked his phone, like this was just another appointment to sit through. "So, do you live here alone?" he asked, eyes lingering on the pictures again. "Not alone," I said. "Just not with people who left me." My voice was even, steady, not bitter. The kind of quiet that doesn't shake, but sinks in deep. He didn't ask anything else. I rose from my seat slowly, walked toward the cabinet at the far end of the room. They both watched as I opened it, pulled out a small silver picture frame, and returned to the table. Without a word, I placed it directly between their plates. In the photo, me, my newborn son, my sister Isolde, standing behind us, arms wrapped around my shoulders. My mother's breath hitched. My father blinked, but neither of them touched the frame. They stared at the photo for a long time, long enough for me to set the plates down one by one, without either of them acknowledging my movement. Only Isolde rose from her chair. She helped without asking. We moved around each other with practiced rhythm, like we had done this 100 times before. No talking, just small gestures that meant more than words ever could. My mother's eyes stayed fixed on the picture. Her mouth was tight, her hands clutched together like she was trying to wring the memory out of her skin. My father leaned back in his seat, blinking slowly, jaw working, but still not saying a damn thing. As I placed the last plate, I caught Isolde's glance. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a warning. It was just her way of saying, "I'm here." The air felt heavy again, and not because of the food. It was something else, like opening a door and letting in a draft you've spent years sealing up. I sat down across from them, watching their reactions. My mother finally asked, "So, you and Isolde are still close?" I didn't even blink. We never stopped. She looked down, as if that answer hurt more than it should have. But it wasn't always like this. It used to be worse. So much worse. I remembered one winter, 11 years old, I think. A box had arrived. Brown cardboard, cheap tape, and inside, a red sweater, thick and soft. It smelled faintly of perfume and starch. I remember lifting it up, holding it to my chest, thinking, "Maybe this year?" She remembered. There was a note inside. "Keep it clean. Your sister will need it for pictures." I wore it once, just to see how it felt. I didn't spill anything, didn't sweat in it, didn't even let the sleeves stretch. Then I folded it and tucked it away in the dresser, like it had never touched me. It wasn't mine. It was never meant to be. Not the sweater, not the room, not the attention. It wasn't about the gift. It was about the message. You don't deserve new things. You're just holding space until she shows up. I learned early how to disappear without leaving, but not from Isolde. She was the only one who found ways to find me. She used the old landline in Dad's office, calling when she knew he was out or asleep. We'd whisper about schoolwork, songs we liked, made-up stories we'd never share with anyone else. We never talked about the house, or our parents. Not until one night when she broke down. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I'm sorry they treat you like background noise. Like you're just the wall around my stage." And I didn't say anything to make her feel better. I didn't need to, because I knew she meant it. That apology stayed with me more than any gift ever could. Now, tonight, watching her pour water for people who still acted like guests in my life, they weren't family anymore, not really. I realized just how much she had carried all those years. When she moved beside me again, she gently tapped my wrist, a silent cue. I stood, walked over to the sideboard, and unzipped the leather folder I had tucked away after they arrived. The same one I had pulled from my bag earlier that morning. Inside were the letters, 10 of them, each dated, each written in my child's handwriting, desperate to stay connected. I had sent them after they left me in that tiny house with my great-aunt. I had written about my classes, the chickens, the way the roof leaked when it rained. I asked for birthday cards. I told them when I lost my first tooth out there. I begged them to come visit, even just once. None of them had ever been answered. But I kept writing. Hope's a stupid kind of stubborn when you're that young. I pulled one letter from the folder. The first one. Folded 3 times, yellowed with time. I slid it across the table toward my mother. Isolde looked down at it, her hands folded tightly in her lap now. "You remember these?" I asked, not needing a reply. "You never wrote back. But I figured if I sent them somewhere, they'd live longer than I would in your memory." My mother didn't touch it. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to, but she didn't. "They were never thrown away," I added, staring straight at her. "You just didn't open them." Her voice was low when it finally came. "You don't understand what was going on back then." "No," I cut in gently. "I don't. Because you never thought I mattered enough to explain anything." There was no screaming. No plates flying across the room. Just a growing silence that pressed down on everyone. Isolde stood behind me again, close enough that I felt her presence. She still hadn't said a word, but I could sense she was holding back tears. "You kept every single one?" she whispered. All of them. And I meant it. Not just the letters, but the memories, the rejections, the nights I stared out the window of a house I didn't belong to, wondering if they even remembered my name. I turned slightly and looked at my sister. You remember the letters I used to send you? Her eyes shimmered, a small nod. Then I reached into the folder once more, pulled out a sealed envelope, thicker, cleaner, and slid it across the table. Not to my sister, but to my mother. She stared at it like it was made of fire. I've kept all the things you threw away, I said calmly, and I brought them back, just for tonight. She didn't touch the envelope. Not with her hands, not with her eyes. She just let it sit there like it might catch fire if she so much as acknowledged its weight. I wasn't disappointed. I had already braced myself for that reaction. It takes a certain kind of pride to throw something away and still pretend it never existed, even when it's placed right in front of you, sealed and labeled in your own handwriting. I watched my mother carefully slide the envelope aside, close enough to her purse that it might disappear by the time dessert came, but not so close that anyone could accuse her of caring. I smiled. Tight. Tired. But not cruel. Some people would rather lose everything than admit they discarded the wrong thing. The sight of her ignoring it brought something old and unwelcome back to the surface. I could see the back seat of that car again, cloth upholstery with a tear in the middle. My legs were too short to touch the floor. I remember pressing my palms to the seat beside me, bracing as the car bumped over potholes. I was 9. They had packed my things in silence. No one argued. No one cried. They told me we were going on a little trip. My sister stayed home. There were 2 trash bags full of my clothes and a duffel bag that still smelled like chlorine from swim lessons. No favorite toy. No goodbye hug. Just my mother glancing back once in the rearview mirror. One of you is going to be somebody, she had said. We have to focus our resources. She didn't say which one, but it didn't need to be said. I didn't argue. I nodded. I thought if I agreed, if I showed them I understood, they'd see how good I could be. That maybe they'd change their minds halfway there and turn around. They didn't. We drove for hours. They didn't play music. They didn't ask how I was feeling. At one point, I asked if I'd still be home for my birthday. My father said, "We'll see." He knew, she knew, I didn't. The gravel road that led to my great-aunt's house was mostly dirt, the kind that clings to your shoes and makes the air thick. The fence was leaning. The windows were covered in plastic sheeting instead of glass. They didn't get out of the car when we pulled up. My mother rolled down the window, called out my aunt's name like she was yelling for a cab. When the door opened, I was handed the duffel bag and both trash bags at once. No instructions, no blessing. Just a, "You be good now," and a door that clicked shut behind me. I watched the taillights disappear, long after the sound of the engine was gone. I waited an extra few minutes, just in case. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe this was a test. They didn't come back. That was the last time I saw them in person until tonight. It wasn't abandonment with shouting or slammed doors. It was worse. It was neat, quiet, practiced. Like they'd already rehearsed it once before, and this time, they finally got it right. Back in the present, I could feel my hands clenched under the table. The smell of roasted chicken hung in the air, untouched. The glasses were sweating. Condensation trickled down the sides. Still, nobody reached for water. My father broke the silence. Not with an apology. Of course not. "We're glad to see you've done something with yourself," he said, like he was commenting on weather or stocks. I didn't blink. I didn't look at him. "It's easier when no one's grading you anymore," I replied. That got his attention. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose. My mother shifted in her seat, finally adjusting her posture as if she'd just remembered she wasn't at a charity luncheon. Her gaze swept the room, photos, furniture, details she likely didn't expect from someone she'd once called a burden. She had that look people get when they walk into a room and realize they underestimated it. like she thought this dinner would be held in a duplex, not a home with vaulted ceilings and frame certifications. I let the moment stretch. I wanted them to see everything they weren't part of. The bottle of wine Otis had brought, the monogrammed bib draped over the edge of the high chair, the still-burning candle in the middle of the table. Every inch of that room had something they had no hand in creating. My son's giggle echoed from upstairs. The conversation halted. My father's mouth twitched like he was going to say something about him. I shot him a glance sharp enough to halt that thought in its tracks. Don't. Not him. I tapped my fork gently against the plate. Not enough to startle, but enough to make their heads turn. Then I said it. Do you remember what you said to me before you left that day? No one answered. My father looked down. My mother didn't even pretend to think. So I sat up straighter, met their silence with steel in my spine. Because I remember every word, and if you don't, I'll repeat it, louder. My words didn't echo. They just sat there, heavy and direct. The kind of truth that didn't ask for space. It took it. My father stared at his glass of water, like it held the answer. My mother shifted in her seat, repositioning her napkin with sudden focus, as if that piece of folded fabric could shield her from what I'd just said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I simply said the sentence they once gave me, wrapped in practicality, hidden behind the polished language of ambition. The kind of sentence you remember not because it was shouted, but because it ended something. One of you is going to be somebody. We have to focus our resources. That was what they told me, and now I watched it land. They didn't deny it. Not even a flinch. I let the silence linger for a beat longer, then leaned back in my chair. Not smug, not vengeful, just steady. Let them sit in it for once. But my mind wasn't in that room anymore. Not entirely. It drifted, pulled backward to a summer that still left blisters on my palms. Isolde had just gotten selected for some prestigious academic camp out of state, something about advanced placement and early college credit. They celebrated with cake. My mother cried proud tears. My father called everyone he knew to tell them how brilliant his daughter was. That same week, I was knee-deep in mud helping Aunt V fix irrigation hoses in the back acre of her land. The sun was brutal. The water pump kept stalling. I sliced my finger on rusted wire and wrapped it in a torn bandana without saying a word. Aunt V handed me a thermos and said, "Some kids are born to shine. Some are born to survive." I didn't take it as an insult. I just nodded and drank. I didn't cry that day. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I already knew tears were a waste when no one was watching. The memory faded as I heard the clink of silverware in the present. My father tried to act casual, like he hadn't just heard his own line used as a mirror. "You've got some nice pieces in here," he said, motioning toward the decor. "Where'd you get that lamp?" He was trying to steer the ship back to safer waters, but I wasn't offering any oars. "Gift," I said. From someone who believed I could be something without needing to prove it. He gave a small nod, like he'd missed the jab entirely. Or maybe he got it and just chose not to show it. That's when my mother finally spoke again. "So, college?" she asked, feigning interest. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from restraint. "I wanted to go," I replied evenly. "You didn't want to help." She blinked. "That's not true." "You wouldn't sign the FAFSA forms," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You said it would be a waste. You said I'd drop out." She opened her mouth, then closed it. I continued. "I applied anyway. Miss LaRue from the school office helped me after hours. We faxed the forms together from the front desk." My father frowned. "You never told us. You never asked." There it was again. That old game they loved to play. Selective amnesia. Faux surprise. Like if they just kept pretending not to know, they wouldn't have to face the truth that they chose to disappear. "It wasn't about the degree," I added, my voice softening just a touch. "It was about not vanishing." I looked down at my hands. Older now, steadier. Back then, they had been raw from working summers in fields and washing laundry by hand. I had studied at night by the window with a flashlight when the power got cut. I wrote essays on borrowed paper and rode the bus 45 minutes each way just to get to class. I didn't care about honors. I just wanted a seat in the room, one they never saved for me. My father leaned forward. "What's the name of that town we sent you to again?" The question hit differently. It wasn't that he didn't know, it was that he had never bothered to remember. I tilted my head, stared at him like I was seeing him for the first time. "You don't remember?" I asked. He hesitated. "It was something Creek?" My mother interjected, annoyed. "Why does it matter now?" I turned to her. "Because that's where I learned how to be someone you couldn't destroy." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. She looked like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to say it was never that serious. But even she knew better. I stood. I walked to the cabinet near the hallway, opened the drawer slowly. I had placed the second envelope there earlier in the day, knowing this moment would come. When I returned, I didn't drop it. I placed it gently next to my father's plate. He stared at it. The white edge glared back at him. "You might recognize some of those signatures." His hands didn't move, and yet the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. He didn't reach for the envelope, not because he was unsure of what it contained, but because he already knew. His silence wasn't confusion, it was confirmation. I didn't explain, I didn't need to. The documents were self-explanatory. Copies of emails, notarized financial records, voided check stubs, every time they had promised help and backed out, every refusal to fund my education while simultaneously sending Isolde tuition and allowance. I sat back in my chair, adjusted my napkin, and waited. Then came the knock. Sharp, 3 deliberate taps. I stood slowly, walked toward the front door, and opened it without a word. Otis Landor stepped inside. He didn't need an introduction, but the way my father's eyes narrowed told me he had either not recognized him immediately or hoped he never would. Otis removed his cap with the same quiet dignity that marked everything he did. His shoulders were broader now than I remembered, but he still carried himself with the same calm, like a man who had seen the worst of people and chosen not to mirror it. My mother stiffened. Her expression told me she hadn't expected this part of the evening. Her face stretched into something that attempted to resemble polite curiosity. It didn't reach her eyes. Otis walked past her, nodding to my sister, who rose slightly in her seat out of habit, then sat again. He reached the end of the table, stopped behind my father's chair, and looked at him plainly. "This one you threw away?" he said, gesturing toward me. "She builds people, not empires, people." My father didn't respond. His jaw tensed. Otis wasn't done. "You fired me for handing her a book, said I was getting too familiar, that she needed boundaries? I thought you meant protection. I didn't realize you meant confinement." My mother spoke before my father could. "This isn't the time or place." Otis didn't even look at her. "Maybe if you had made time back then, this place wouldn't feel so foreign to you now." He turned to me and offered a small nod. I returned it, letting the power of the moment sit. Otis had always had a way of saying very little and leaving a crater behind. And then I could feel it. That shift. The power in the room no longer belonged to them. I stood and walked to the side buffet. From underneath a stack of placemats, I pulled a thin black binder. "This," I said, placing it gently on the table, "is the revised will." "Yours?" My mother gasped. "I found the original copy last year when Aunt V passed. She still had her records. Back when you made me her responsibility, you included financial support. But more than that, I was listed as a beneficiary." My father looked like he'd been hit with cold water. "You weren't supposed to see that." "No," I replied. "I wasn't. That was the point, wasn't it?" He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. "I don't care about the money," I said, voice steady. "I just needed proof I was ever included at all." My mother's voice was small. "We didn't think you'd..." survive long enough to need it. That stung, more than I thought it would. I laughed, not bitterly, just hollow. The kind of laugh you let out when you're finally too tired to cry. Well, I said, I did. Otis took a step forward, offering my father a short, direct glance. She didn't just survive. She built a life out of nothing, and not just for herself. I turned and walked to the bar cart. The room had gone still. Even my son's soft babbling from upstairs felt like a hymn. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned back, and raised it. How does it feel? I asked my father. To sit in a house you didn't help build, at a table you never earned a seat at? The silence turned sharp. My father didn't answer. Not because he couldn't. Because for the first time in his life, he knew better than to try. I didn't sit down after the toast. Instead, I stood behind my chair, both hands lightly gripping the top rail like I was anchoring myself in a storm I'd prepared for. The silence thickened again. Not the awkward kind. The kind that knows it's being watched. My father's eyes stayed locked on the envelope he refused to touch. My mother reached for her glass, with fingers that trembled more than she wanted anyone to see. I let it breathe. The tension, the weight. Then I moved forward. No one's here to shame you, I said, voice low but unmistakably firm. I invited you to witness. There's a difference. She blinked slowly, her lips moving just enough to form. You invited us here to humiliate us? No, I said, pausing just long enough. I invited you to watch. I slid a new document across the table, this time directly toward her. A single page, photocopied, highlighted in yellow. A 1098 T form. She scanned it without touching it. Her eyes widened just slightly before narrowing again. That's, she started. My tax form, I finished. Filed under my name, claimed by you. Her face twisted into the same shape it made when I used to spill juice on the carpet as a child. Controlled disapproval. You didn't call me for 10 years, I said, stepping closer to the table, but you filed me. Isolde looked down into her lap. Otis stood quietly near the corner of the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I leaned my palms gently against the table, voice still level. You didn't raise me, you didn't check in. But when it was tax season, suddenly I existed again. My mother's voice dropped. It was just a clerical thing. We thought... No, I cut her off. Not with volume, but with clarity. You thought no one would notice. You thought I wouldn't matter enough to file for myself. You didn't expect me to build a life that required a credit report. That was the crack. The mask started slipping, and I wasn't finished. I stepped back and let my memory do what it always had, file and retrieve. 2 years ago, middle of March, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering. Venetia? My mother's voice had come through tinny, rehearsed. Hey, honey. Listen, there's a small thing with the IRS. They flagged something from last year, and it's probably nothing, but they want a signature from you on a clarification form. Can I email it? That call had lasted under 5 minutes. She never asked how I was. Never asked where I lived. Never once mentioned my son. But she wanted a signature. I didn't sign. But I saved the voicemail. She had said, You don't have to read the whole thing. It's just a quick sign and send. You'll be doing us a favor. We've always looked out for you, you know? I replayed that message more than once. Not out of pain, but out of sheer disbelief. The voice of a woman who had erased me from her life for a decade, now calling to tell me I owed her one. Tonight, I let the silence speak for me again. I didn't even know you still had my number, I said now, looking at her. Funny how I became reachable once paperwork was involved. My father's hand was flat against the table now. The knuckles were pale. He didn't look at me. I was applying for a mortgage, I continued. That's how I found it. Multiple returns, years worth. You claimed me as a dependent until I was 23. I turned to him now. That's fraud, by the way. financially and legally. He shifted, eyes darting to my mother. We weren't doing anything malicious. You were doing something convenient, I said. Let's call it what it was. Otis stepped forward, setting a manila folder gently on the table. They didn't just claim her, he said calmly. They withheld thousands in tax credits. That's theft. My mother's mouth opened again, ready to protest, but she saw something in my face that made her close it. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the final folder. It was heavier. I placed it in front of them. I haven't filed charges, I said. Yet. But I have spoken to a lawyer, and he's very interested in the paper trail. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You wouldn't. I smiled, not sweetly. This dinner, I said, this is me being generous. No one spoke. For the first time all night, they didn't interrupt. They didn't argue. They didn't offer a single excuse. I let it sit. Then I pulled my chair back, slow and smooth, and sat down. I made this meal for you because I needed you to understand one thing, I said, folding my hands neatly. I am not the girl you sent away. I am the woman who came back without needing anything from you. Isolde reached for the water pitcher, quietly refilling her glass. She didn't say a word, but I saw the way her shoulders relaxed. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance, truth, precision. My mother looked smaller now, not in stature, but in presence. She picked up the edge of the first document and began to read, finally. But I was already done talking. My father's fingertips hovered near the edge of the folder, but he didn't reach for it, not yet. My mother sat rigid, jaw locked tight, like she was chewing glass behind her lips. That's when I reached down beneath my chair and pulled out the small black remote I'd kept hidden beneath the napkin on my lap. I pressed the power button. The TV mounted on the wall lit up slowly, reflecting in their glasses like a courtroom screen. I think it's time we heard from the one voice you always did listen to, I said. Isolde. Their heads turned toward the screen, and I watched the exact moment when they realized what was coming. I hadn't warned them, because the truth, unlike apologies, doesn't need an invitation. The screen flickered to a well-lit room. A woman, my sister, sat against a plain background, hair pulled back, eyes tired but steady. 2 years ago, she'd been asked to speak in a documentary series that focused on family estrangement. She called me before agreeing. They want me to talk about our story, she said over the phone, but I'll only do it if you say it's okay. I don't need you to protect me, I told her. I just need you to be honest. She nodded through the phone line, and a week later, she recorded her interview. That clip was never released publicly. Until tonight. The room fell completely silent as her voice filled the space. My sister was never dumb, she said. She just wasn't who they wanted. My mother blinked rapidly. She was kind, creative, quiet, but in our house, none of that counted unless it looked good on a resume. The footage cut to her hands, fidgeting with a ring on her thumb. They called her a burden, said she was average, too soft, too emotional, but I called her my compass. The screen cut back to her face. I didn't always do enough. I stayed quiet longer than I should have, and I regret that. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, her body shaking, not with grief, but with fear. She glanced at me like she might beg me to turn it off. I didn't. My father reached forward as if to grab the remote, but I held up my hand. You watched me walk away, I said softly. The least you can do is watch me speak. The video continued. She wrote to me every week, Isolde said. From the day they sent her away to that house until the day she stopped hoping they'd write back. I read every word, and I kept them. I could feel my throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the way those words landed, full and solid. The camera in the video zoomed in slowly. She looked straight into the lens and said, "She deserved better, and the world deserves to know what being not smart enough meant in our family." The screen faded to black. No credits, No music. Just silence. My mother's face had gone pale. She wasn't crying now, just frozen, like a statue made of guilt. "You did this to shame us?" she asked, voice cracking. I shook my head. "No, I did this to remind myself I wasn't imagining it." My father stood slowly, hands on the table like he needed the support. He didn't leave the room, just shifted his weight like a man realizing he couldn't walk away from a thing that lived in public memory now. He looked at the photo frame again, the one still sitting between their plates. Then he looked at Otis. Otis didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a reminder that the life I'd built hadn't come from their guidance. It had grown in spite of it. "You didn't just lose a daughter," I said, breaking the quiet. "You lost the chance to know her." My mother finally lowered her hands. Her eyes were wet but dry of remorse. "You always misunderstood us." "No," I said. "I understood you perfectly. I just stopped believing it was my job to keep earning your love." The room exhaled, like it had been holding its breath. I stood, walking slowly toward the door, not to leave, but to breathe away from the heat of that moment. Halfway there, I turned back. "You always loved her more," I said, not bitter, just factual. "But she loved me enough to tell the truth." My mother flinched like it was a slap. My father didn't move. And that's when it hit me. They had lost the story. For years, they'd been the ones who got to tell it. At church, at dinner parties, at reunions. They got to shape the narrative. One daughter brilliant, one gone. One worth investing in, the other quietly forgotten. Not anymore. Tonight, the world saw what I saw. And I decided, quietly, completely, that the name they gave me no longer belonged to them. I didn't leave the room after that final sentence. I didn't need to. The power had already shifted. I could feel it in the way their eyes avoided mine. I returned to my seat, not looking for confirmation, not even for understanding. Just stillness. Closure, maybe. I bent slightly and pulled the last folder from beneath my chair. A thin gray one, plain, unassuming, but heavier than the rest in consequence. I placed it on the table beside the wine glass I hadn't touched in a while. "You took away my name," I said, voice even. "So I made it official." My mother blinked slowly, as if her brain had to reroute just to make sense of what I said. My father turned toward the folder like it might explode if he touched it. Inside were 3 documents, one for identity, one for legality, and one for accountability. The first was the legal certificate confirming my name change, from Venetia Ruth Winslow to Venetia Ruth Landor. No middle initial borrowed from my mother. No last name passed down from a father who'd washed his hands of me. Just me. Claimed, not given. The second was a cease and desist letter addressed to them both, courtesy of my lawyer. It outlined the misuse of my name, the unauthorized tax filings, the reputational harm caused by telling people I had disappeared, when really, I was just never called. And the third, a printed summary from the fraud investigation I had quietly opened months ago. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. But a file. An official inquiry. Something that would follow them into the financial corners of their life if they ever thought about rewriting the narrative again. My mother reached for her chest, the heel of her palm resting just beneath her collarbone. "You'd drag us through this? Legally?" my father finally asked, his voice stripped of arrogance now, thin like rice paper. "No," I answered. "You dragged me through this emotionally, for decades. This is just paper." He sat back slowly. My mother didn't speak. I unfastened the clasp on the folder and turned it around so it faced them. "I didn't do it for revenge," I said. "I did it because I needed a life that didn't belong to people who chose not to be in mine." The room was still warm, but my skin felt cool, like something tight had finally released in my chest. 2 months ago, I'd sat in a small legal office in downtown Jackson. It wasn't grand, just 2 desks, mismatched chairs, and a humming window unit. But it was quiet. Safe. The clerk had peered over her glasses, tapping her keyboard. "Reason for the name change?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Because I earned a name of my own." She looked up, didn't ask anything else. She printed the form. When I signed the line, I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I felt something deeper. Like the ground under my feet had shifted just slightly. Like the weight I carried had finally been shared by the earth itself. Venetia Ruth Landor. It fit. Not like a costume or a disguise, but like skin. And now, back at the dinner table, I looked at the people who had once taught me how small I could be. They had no voice left in the room, no version of the story they could reclaim. Even Isolde was silent now. She stared at the edge of her plate, eyes shining, but not crying. My father cleared his throat, trying again. "We didn't think you'd make it. Out there." I turned toward him, not angry, not wounded, just aware. "You told me I had no legacy," I said, "but I built one. You just weren't invited." There was no retaliation in my tone, no venom, only truth, and it was louder than any accusation I could have thrown. Otis looked over at me and gave a single nod, like a man who understood what it meant to win quietly. I stood again, but this time it wasn't to make a point. I walked over to the guest room door, eased it open, and scooped up my son. He stirred a little, blinked, then curled against my shoulder. As I walked back through the dining room, I paused beside Otis and gently touched his arm. He followed me toward the front. I turned back once, not for drama, but for clarity. "This house is mine," I said. "This name is mine. And this silence? Also mine." My father didn't move. My mother looked as though she wanted to speak, but knew better now. The name they'd once given me had been a mark of ownership, a tag, an assumption that I'd always be less. But Venetia Ruth Landor wasn't theirs. It was mine. And as I stepped out that door, I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. The front door closed softly behind me. Not a slam, not a statement, just a quiet seal on a night that had been a decade in the making. I carried my son upstairs, his weight pressing warm against my chest. He was half awake, his tiny fingers curled around the strap of my dress like he'd never let go. I kissed his temple as I laid him in his crib, then stood for a long moment at the edge of the bed, watching his chest rise and fall. There was no storm left in me, no adrenaline, just calm. The kind that settles in after a long fight, when there's nothing left to swing at. Downstairs, the silence of the house wrapped around me. Not the cold, echoing kind I used to dread, but something gentler. Steady, like a body that had finally taken a full breath. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot on hardwood. The framed documents were still on the table. The envelope unopened. The TV dark again. A used fork rested beside a still full plate. My father's water glass was empty. They had left quietly. I hadn't heard the door close. By the time I reached the kitchen, the sun had started to press gently against the edge of the blinds. Not quite morning, but no longer night. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and leaned back against the counter. My phone buzzed. A message. Just a line. "We won't fight the papers. Do what you need to. D." No apology, no explanation, just surrender. I stared at it for a long second, then forwarded it to my lawyer, typed one sentence, "As discussed, proceed," and hit send. Then I deleted the original text. Not out of anger, not revenge, but finality. Isolde came by mid-morning. She didn't knock, just let herself in the way people do when they know they're welcome. She didn't bring up the dinner. She didn't have to. We just stood in the kitchen for a while, both of us barefoot, both of us holding warm mugs like shields. She was the one who broke the quiet. "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I said. We sat at the counter, elbows brushing. No makeup, no small talk. Just breathing in the same space again. "Why did you keep talking to them?" I asked finally, not accusing, just curious. Isolde rubbed her thumb along the edge of her mug. "Because I couldn't lose both of you. That answer sat between us, raw but not sharp. You always had choices, I said. I did, she nodded. And I chose badly, at first. But I never stopped loving you, Ven. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't ready to say, I love you too. Not yet. But I placed my hand over hers and gave it a squeeze. We cleaned up the dishes together. She folded the napkins neatly, the way Mom used to do at holidays. I rinsed the glasses. There was no rush, just rhythm. Later that afternoon, after she left, I took my son outside. He toddled barefoot in the backyard, chasing the dog, laughing so freely I felt my ribs loosen. He stopped by the wooden block said Otis had made him last Christmas. It was simple, smooth squares, arches, and ramps, but my son played with it like it held magic. Because to him, it did. He stacked a tower with surprising precision, then looked up at me with a grin. Did I do good, Mama? I crouched down and cupped his face. You don't have to do anything to be good, I whispered. You're already enough. He blinked at me, then turned back to his blocks. And just like that, I felt the wound shift again. Not disappear, but shift. That's the thing about scars. They don't vanish, but they stop hurting when you touch them. By evening, I sat at the kitchen table alone, a cup of tea in hand, a quiet house around me. I glanced at the drawer where I'd kept all the documents, then at the fireplace where the old family photo used to hang. I had taken it down years ago. Now, only a single frame sat on the mantel. Me and my son, his hand in mine, the wind in our hair. I traced the rim of my mug with one finger, then looked out the window. The trees barely moved. The sun had dipped behind the roofline, softening everything in amber light. I thought about the girl I had been, sitting on a porch in a strange town, holding letters no one answered. I thought about the woman I had become, seated at her own table, in her own home, with a name she chose. Some wounds don't close, but they stop bleeding, and for now, that's enough. Hi, my name's Aveline, and I used to think being the quiet one meant being the safe one. My sister, Valora, sold the necklace our mother left for both of us, and told a jewelry store I was a thief, said, "This place doesn't sell cheap stuff," loud enough for strangers to laugh. But that wasn't the worst part. She'd already rewritten our family story, cut me out of the will, deleted my name from our company's records, and claimed the heirlooms like they were hers all along. And when her billionaire husband bought that same necklace, $12 million in cash, and put it around my neck, no one had words. But I still do. Want to know what really happened, and how far some people will go to erase their own blood? I arrived just before the lunch crowd began clogging Rodeo Drive, when the sidewalks still shimmered under the lazy California sun and the boutique's windows gleamed like they hadn't been touched by real people in years. De la Vigne. The name was etched in gold cursive across the glass, same as it had been when my mother would glance at it with quiet reverence. She never stepped inside, said it wasn't a place for women like her. That day, I didn't feel much different. The velvet pouch in my purse wasn't fancy. The drawstring was frayed, and the color had faded, but I had kept it intact all these years. Inside was a necklace, rose gold, light as breath, with a tiny charm shaped like a magnolia bud, our mother's favorite flower. She gave it to us. Not to me, not to Valora, to us. I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to ask for restoration. A simple polish, maybe a new clasp. Just something to make it whole again. Some people wear grief. I carried mine in canvas and cotton, and soft, almost forgotten things. The woman behind the counter didn't look up when I approached. She had that crisp demeanor unique to women who believed the value of a person could be measured by the stitching of their handbag. Yes? She asked flatly. I wanted to ask about restoring this, I said, setting the pouch on the counter. She opened it casually, the way you might expect someone to inspect a returned item from clearance. But then she paused, fingers tightening slightly around the chain. She looked closer, furrowed her brow, then tapped something into her screen. After a moment, she glanced at me. Longer this time, almost reassessing. This item was sold to us 2 months ago by a Mrs. Valora Greaves, she said slowly. Are you trying to repurchase it? I blinked, not immediately understanding. I'm sorry? I asked. This necklace, she repeated, lifting it gently. It came in with other estate pieces, very particular provenance. You're not authorized to request alterations. I stared at her, trying to make the words make sense. Valora had sold it. I reached for the necklace, almost instinctively. On the underside of the clasp, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were the initials M.M., Marian Madsen, our mother. I didn't come here to buy anything, I managed to say. This belonged to my mother. She gave it to both of us. The clerk offered a small, tight smile. Well, I suppose your sister didn't see it that way. She placed it back into the pouch and set it aside, just out of my reach. I'll have to ask my manager how to proceed. If you'll step aside for a moment, please. So I did. I stepped back into a space that didn't want me. I waited by the entrance, pretending to check my phone, fingers numb. I shouldn't have been surprised. Valora always did have a way of turning ours into mine. I didn't notice the doors open behind me until I heard the click of heels. Deliberate, sharp. The kind of click that makes heads turn because it's supposed to. She was dressed in white, clean, crisp, expensive. Her sunglasses slid down just enough to reveal eyes that scanned the boutique like she owned it. Technically, she did not. Emotionally? That was another matter. Didn't expect to see you here, Valora said, lips barely curling into what passed for a smile. For a half second, I forgot the last 3 years of silence and thought she might hug me. Then I saw her eyes, glassy, detached, like she didn't recognize me, or worse, like she did, and wished she didn't. I nodded slowly. Just came to ask about something Mom left behind. She cocked her head. Oh, that old thing? She said, eyes flicking toward the counter. You can't just walk in here like it's a thrift store. This isn't Pasadena. The words landed louder than they were spoken. A few nearby customers glanced over, mildly entertained. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. She turned and gave a subtle nod to the staff, as if to signal that I didn't belong. And in that moment, I felt it. The real difference between us. It wasn't the clothes, or the car she parked out front. It was how easily she could erase someone without even raising her voice. Why did you sell it? I asked. Valora didn't flinch. It didn't suit me. It was old, she said with a shrug. Like a lot of things we should leave behind. There was no malice in her voice. That would have at least made her human. This was worse. This was administrative. The boutique manager approached her with a soft smile. Mrs. Greaves, he said warmly, the suite is ready whenever you are. She turned to follow, tossing a glance over her shoulder. You should really call before showing up places, Aveline. It's not considerate. I watched her disappear into the private section, heels still clicking like punctuation marks. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat down on the small bench by the entry, beside a display of luxury leather wallets I couldn't afford and didn't want. I thought of our mother, how she used to trace her fingers across that magnolia charm and say, nothing worth keeping ever truly leaves. But here I was. And it had. If memory had weight, she just dropped the heaviest silence on my chest. I stood from the bench, pulled my coat tighter, and walked toward the counter again. Not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let her have the final word in that moment. My fingers brushed the pouch still lying near the clerk's elbow. She flinched slightly, as if I might snatch it and run. Can I speak to your manager? I asked, keeping my voice level. She glanced toward the back, then wordlessly disappeared behind a frosted glass door. A minute later, a man emerged, tall, polished, and carrying a smile he clearly practiced more in mirrors than in conversation. Ms. Baird, he said, his voice courteous but distant. I understand there's been some confusion regarding the necklace? Yes. I brought it in to ask about restoration, but I was just told it was Sold here. By someone I know. It belonged to my mother. He nodded, glancing at the tablet in his hand. I see. Do you mind if I confirm a few details? Please, I said. He tapped a few times, squinting. Then his mouth tightened ever so slightly. That's odd. It appears your name is already in our system. I waited, unsure if that was good or bad. However, he continued, hesitating now, there's a flag on your profile. It says you're on a restricted client list. I blinked, trying to process. A restricted list? For what? He adjusted the tablet, turned it slightly my way, not fully, just enough. There it was, in bold text under my name. Client flagged for disruptive behavior. Xiao Xiao, 14, 2019 authorization, entered by V. Greaves Valora. I stared at the screen, then back at him. Disruptive behavior? He cleared his throat. We don't usually disclose internal notes, but since this is clearly a misunderstanding. I want a copy of that, I interrupted, sharper than intended. I'm afraid I can't give you a printout, but I can assure you it won't affect future visits if we... She didn't just erase me, I muttered, more to myself than to him. She turned my name into a warning. The man looked uncomfortable. Would you like to see the necklace again? No, I said, stepping back. I think I've seen everything I need to. I left the side counter, walking slowly back toward the main floor. The boutique had grown busier. Clients fluttered between display cases, laughing over glasses of sparkling water, draped in silks and curated confidence. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was somewhere colder than that, an old ache that finally had a name. As I approached the central showcase, the necklace was back in its place, displayed under perfect lighting, positioned to seduce. I took one step forward. Excuse me, a young associate said, stepping in front of me. That piece is reserved. I looked at her calmly. I'm not here to touch it. I just wanted to see it again. She shifted uncomfortably. It's reserved for certain guests. A woman nearby, mid-50s, flawless skin, draped in emeralds, let out a soft, theatrical chuckle. God, she really thought she could touch that, she whispered to her friend, loud enough for me to hear. I didn't respond. I simply turned back toward the exit. But then Valora's voice, cutting, clean, and calibrated, rose just above the ambient hum of classical music. This place doesn't sell cheap stuff. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The words dropped into the silence like a coin in an empty room. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The damage wasn't in the words. It was in the fact that no one disagreed. I slowly adjusted my coat again, lifting the collar. I turned toward the exit. One more step and I'd be out of her theater. Then came the whisper, low and wet with implication, from behind the counter. She's probably casing the place. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, not because I was afraid, but because I recognized what was happening. I was being reframed, a thief. Valora's greatest talent had never been cruelty. It was narrative control. She knew how to build a version of you others would believe faster than they'd bother asking you to explain. I turned, just slightly, and saw the clerk, who'd whispered now, pretending to polish a watch band. Another nodded, subtle as fog. Their posture said more than words ever could. No one in that boutique saw me anymore. Not really. I was already labeled, already coded, already processed. My mother once told me silence came in two forms, grace or surrender. That day, mine was neither. It was a note, sharp, mental, filed away. I left without a word. But they hadn't watched me leave. They'd watched me stay, quietly, in their memory, like a fuse that hadn't burned out yet. By the time I got home, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains, leaving Pasadena wrapped in the kind of golden quiet that always made the air feel heavier. I slipped off my shoes and let my coat fall over the back of a chair, not bothering to hang it. My purse hit the entryway table with a soft thud. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see the room to know where everything was. I walked straight to the hallway closet, pulled down the navy blue storage box labeled in Sharpie, Miskell Old Stuff, and carried it to the kitchen table. My hands moved on muscle memory as I opened it. A few greeting cards from birthdays no one remembered anymore. A faded Polaroid of me and Valora in matching Easter dresses. A ribbon from a piano recital I barely practiced for. And then I saw it. A folded sheet of printer paper, creased 3 times, edges slightly curled from being opened too many times over the years. I didn't need to unfold it to know what it was. I had written it. Every word. I'm sorry if my presence was a distraction. I only wanted to support you. I read it aloud, quietly, like a line from a play I'd never gotten to finish. It was the email I had sent Valora 5 years ago after she'd uninvited me, publicly, from the launch of her flagship boutique. Back then, I told myself she was under pressure, that she didn't mean to humiliate me in front of mutual friends. I convinced myself that if I apologized, if I took the blame, maybe we could reset. Because that's what people do in families, right? They find ways to stay in orbit, even if it means shrinking themselves. But now I understood. That apology hadn't closed any wounds. It had become evidence, used to justify her narrative that I was emotionally disruptive, used to validate a blacklist that followed me into the very boutique she once begged me to help her build. She hadn't just framed me, she'd used my own frame. I pushed the letter aside and opened my laptop. It hummed to life, the screen glowing against the dim room. Out of habit, I clicked open Instagram. I don't know why, habit maybe, or the need to punish myself with one more layer of curated fiction. There she was. Valora, front and center on her profile, in a photo from her first boutique event. The caption read, "Built it, paid for it, deserved it." Over 1,200 likes, dozens of comments. Such a powerful solo moment. You've always been self-made, V. But I remembered that day. I had been standing right next to her in that picture. I helped manage catering. I handed out the gift bags. I stayed after to help clean up while she left early for a dinner with investors. I zoomed in on the photo. The angle had changed slightly. The lighting was cropped just so. But it was the same backdrop, same stage, same white dress with the silver brooch. And I was gone, cropped out like I never existed. I opened my local folder, one of those private ones no one but me ever saw. There it was, the original uncropped version, me and Valora side by side, her hand resting on my shoulder. I had smiled too wide. She had done that thing with her eyes, where she smirked more than she smiled. And now she'd rewritten it. I stared at the 2 photos side by side. One version posted for the world, the other saved in my folder, unseen, unclaimed. It wasn't just about a necklace or a blacklist. It was about narrative, about who gets to tell the story, who gets to exist in it. She had decided that her version of events was more palatable without me in the frame. But I remembered being there. And I had proof. I uploaded the original image to a private cloud drive, created a folder, labeled it, record of what actually happened. Then I sat in silence. I didn't feel vindicated or angry. Just real. Like someone who had finally accepted that sometimes people don't just move on. They make sure the door is locked behind them. I thought about the years I'd spent second-guessing myself, about the time I swallowed my voice to keep the peace, about how every attempt to reconnect had ended with me apologizing for wanting basic decency. I wasn't removed because I didn't belong. I was removed because my presence was too true. And that kind of truth? It unsettles people who live inside their own polished version of things. If she could crop me from the past, what would she do to control the future? The next afternoon, I stood across the street from the boutique, my coffee going cold in my hand, as I watched the valets scramble to park a parade of imported cars. De La Vigne always looked like a set piece for someone else's story. Polished, aloof, and just detached enough from reality to make you question your own. I didn't plan to go inside again so soon. but sometimes silence leaves a taste in your mouth that only truth can rinse out. I walked in slowly, deliberately. The same soft lighting bathed the display cases. The same curated scent lingered in the air, roses and cedar, and something sharper beneath, like ambition masked in perfume. This time, no one greeted me. I approached the center showcase, where the necklace still sat. I didn't reach for it. I just looked. Up close, the charm didn't sparkle so much as it performed. I leaned forward slightly, tracing the chain with my eyes, stopping at the clasp. I needed to know. There had been an engraving once, something small, almost imperceptible, unless you were looking for it. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The same associate from the other day had reappeared. Her tone still rehearsed, but thinner now, almost wary. "Yes," I said softly. "I was hoping to see the underside of the necklace. I believe there used to be something engraved." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I can check with our backroom staff. Please wait here." As she disappeared, I became aware of voices entering the boutique. Familiar, forced, and far too loud for a place like this. Valora. She was dressed in a deep emerald jumpsuit today, her hair slicked back into that unforgiving bun that always made her look taller. She didn't see me right away. She was mid-laugh with another woman, someone I didn't recognize, mid-40s, dripping with diamonds and Botox confidence. Then Valora's eyes landed on me. For a second, her smile twitched. Just slightly. Then she leaned toward the woman next to her, lowered her voice. But not enough. "Be careful," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "She used to steal little things as a kid. You never really know with her." It didn't matter that the words were framed like a joke. It didn't matter that they were said with a half smile. The damage was already airborne. The boutique froze. A man browsing cufflinks glanced up. The woman with Valora looked startled, then giggled nervously, like someone unsure whether they were being invited to laugh or warned not to. I didn't move, not right away. The associate returned, avoiding eye contact now. "Our back technician can show you the necklace. Follow me, please." We stepped into a small, quiet room in the back, part storage, part workspace. A young man with gloved hands held the necklace under a magnifying lens. The light hit just right. I leaned in. There, beneath the clasp, was a rectangular patch. Smooth. Too smooth. Something had been scrubbed off. It wasn't rough or clumsy. It was methodical, professional, the kind of erasure that took time and intention. I didn't need a microscope to remember what used to be there. It had read, "For my daughters, M.M. Marion Madsen, our mother. She had the engraving done just after Dad passed, said it was her way of reminding us we still had each other, even when the family felt smaller. Valora had it removed." I straightened up, nodded to the technician, and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't ask what I was looking for. As I walked back through the boutique toward the front, I passed Valora again. This time, she met my eyes. "What did you think you'd find back there?" she asked, voice casual, almost teasing. "I didn't think. I knew," I replied calmly. "You didn't just rewrite history. You cleaned it with acid." She blinked, caught off guard for half a second, then recovered. "Oh, come on. It's just a necklace." "No," I said, still walking. "It was a receipt, and you burned it." I left before she could answer. Outside, the sky had turned that pale gray that warned of late afternoon drizzle. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't rush. I needed the walk, needed to feel the pavement under my feet, the air on my face. I needed something real, something unsanitized by chandeliers and curated shame. Because here's what I knew. Every insult sounds more reasonable in a velvet room. Every lie smells more expensive in a store with chandeliers. And every bystander in that boutique, every clerk, every client, every passive nod, wasn't just watching. They were participating. Not one person said, "That's not okay." Not one asked, "Is that true?" They didn't have to. Their silence did the heavy lifting. I didn't scream. I didn't break. But she should have known. Quiet isn't always permission. I lingered near the hallway exit, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, while my mind replayed every word Valora had said, like static in a radio. I wasn't texting. I wasn't checking email. I just needed something to hold, something that kept me from curling my fingers into fists. From the corner of my eye, I saw her, Isolde. She was maybe 23, 24 at most. One of the newer hires, always polite but careful not to be too visible. That day, her eyes moved like she was scanning for cameras, rather than customers. She passed close, just enough to slip a folded paper into my hand. I opened it without drama. Inside, in neat, nervous handwriting, were 7 words. I saw what she changed. You weren't wrong. Isolde didn't stop walking. She kept her voice low, barely audible. I'd help more, she murmured, but I'm on probation here. I could lose everything. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once. And that was enough. It hit me then, not just what Valora had done, but how she had trained the room around her. Everyone here had been taught not just to serve her, but to protect her. Not through affection, through silence, through fear. It wasn't just money that bought her power. It was pressure, leveraged like interest, subtle and constant. No one said no to Valora because they didn't want to lose the small space they were allowed to occupy. I stepped out of the boutique into a sky that was thick with clouds and felt heavier than it should have. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't care. My legs moved on memory as I walked toward the bus stop, the kind of walk where the world falls quiet except for your own breathing and the slow rise of clarity. By the time I got home, I'd already made a decision. But before I acted, I let myself remember something. 2 years ago, right after our mother's funeral, I'd returned to the old house, not for furniture or jewelry or even photos. I just wanted a few of Mom's books. There was this tattered hardcover of To Kill a Mockingbird that still had her notes in the margins. That was what I came for. Valora answered the door. She was already in athleisure and full makeup, her version of casual mourning. She held a mug with the words, "Let's build empires," printed in gold. "You don't have to knock," she said, "but since you're here, we should talk." I stepped inside. Everything smelled new. Too new. The kind of new that meant something had been sanitized. "I sold the house," she said, setting the mug down. "It doesn't make sense for it to just sit here. Besides, it's not like you could have afforded the property taxes." The words were smooth, like she'd rehearsed them. I blinked. "You sold it?" "It's done," she replied. "The buyers close next week." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I nodded. I walked past her and went to Mom's study. Half the books were already boxed up. She didn't change the locks. She changed the deed. She didn't just move on. She bulldozed the version of the past where we both mattered. I should have said it then. Should have looked her dead in the eye and said, "If you could evict a memory, you would." But I didn't. I packed the book. I left. No goodbye, no confrontation. Just that aching, familiar silence. But this time would be different. Back in my apartment, I turned on the lamp in the corner, the one Mom gave me when I moved out. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook and wrote one line in black ink. This time, I will not stay quiet. I reached into the bottom drawer, pulled out the folder I had kept all these years. It had no label, no decoration. Inside were documents Valora hoped I'd forgotten. Emails, photos, receipts, and that picture, the picture, from her first store launch. The one where I stood beside her before she cropped me out. I scanned it again, saved it as a PDF, attached it to an email address to one person, Maelis Trent. No subject line, just the image. Maelis was a journalist, independent, sharp, and most importantly, unafraid of uncomfortable stories. Years ago, I helped her vet a source for a piece on wage theft in luxury retail. We hadn't spoken in some time, but I knew she'd remember me. I hovered over the send button. I thought about the whispers, The receipt in my hand. The house that no longer had our mother's laughter in its walls. The necklace that had once symbolized love, now buried under lies and polish. I pressed send. And just like that, something shifted inside me. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't interested in public drama. But I wasn't going to pretend anymore that silence meant peace. Some people mistake your quiet as permission. Others use it as proof you never mattered. Valora had done both. The next morning, light filtered through my apartment blinds like it was trying not to disturb me. But my phone had already done that. It buzzed twice, then again. Then once more. I rolled over, grabbed it, expecting nothing more than some work email or maybe a subscription notice I'd forgotten to cancel. But the subject lines were different this time. Is this you? You need to see this. Wait, she's your sister? I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and tapped the first message. It wasn't long, just a link and a screenshot from a TikTok clip. My heart didn't drop exactly, it slowed. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed play. There we were. Me, standing like a statue inside De La Vigne. The necklace glimmered behind the glass. My posture said everything, shoulders slightly hunched, face too still. Valora's voice came through, clear and sharp like she'd been mic'd. This place doesn't sell cheap stuff. The camera panned to me just in time to capture my expression. Blank, unreadable. I hadn't realized someone had been filming, but of course they had. There are always phones, always watchers. The caption read, "Rich woman humiliates sister over $12 necklace. Family fail. De La Vigne drama." My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something slower and deeper. I scrolled down to the comments. She didn't even say anything. That's the kind of pain you recognize. Can't believe blood did that to blood. Silent type always gets stepped on until they snap. She'll come back swinging. This isn't luxury, it's cruelty in Kashmir. I refreshed the page. Over 800,000 views, 26,000 likes, thousands of comments, some supportive, some cruel, some just watching for the entertainment. The video had gone viral overnight. And not because I'd done anything, but because I hadn't. Because I hadn't defended myself. Because I stood there and let Valora's words land like slaps in a boutique full of bystanders with expensive sunglasses and silent mouths. They didn't film my pain, but they shared it anyway. I put the phone down, got up, and made myself coffee with shaking hands. The machine sputtered louder than usual. My reflection in the microwave door looked tired, but there was something else there now, something more alert. I sipped slowly, then walked to the kitchen table where my old folder still lay open from the night before. Pages half pulled, images scattered. I shuffled them back into order with care, pausing at the photo of us. The photo. The one where I hadn't been erased. I wasn't going to let her write the ending. Across town, in a boutique security office tucked behind a mirrored wall, a different kind of story had played out the night before. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I'd been told enough since. Valora, in her usual posturing, had sent a Slack message to the boutique's private channel. I saw the screenshot later. Flag her name, no re-entry, any footage, private, no statements. No statements. Boutique policy was clear. Avoid press, avoid scandal. But not because they cared about truth. They cared about narrative, about control. Valora didn't want me out because I caused trouble. She wanted me out because I disrupted her version of the story. I was told a staffer, maybe Isolde, maybe someone else, had tried to push back, even if quietly. That's when the manager stepped in. Don't engage. If she pushes, we have incident notes from 2019. Old lies, reused like wallpaper. Convenient, easy to peel and stick when needed. She's unstable, someone else had typed. Best to let her fade. Fade. I sat back down at my desk, refreshed the video again. Nearly 1 million views now. The comments scrolled faster than I could read. Then, I saw one that stopped me, cold. There's more to this story. Someone better tell it before she's edited out again. Edited out again. I opened the folder on my desktop. Record of what actually happened. clicked through the files. I had images, screenshots, emails, the receipt, the original photo, the gift letter from our mother, all of it. It had sat there for years, waiting for something I hadn't even realized I was building toward. I selected the files, created a Dropbox link, watched the bar crawl toward 100%. Then I copied the link into a new email. But I didn't send it, not yet. They wanted me silent. Now they were afraid of what I might say. She banned me from her store, but not from her story. I stared at the blank screen for a moment after saving the Dropbox link, my finger still hovering over the trackpad. The cursor blinked steadily, like it was daring me to hit send. But instead, I closed the laptop and slid it aside. Something told me I wasn't done, not yet. There was more to remember, and it was time I finally faced it. I pulled a manila envelope from the bottom drawer of the credenza by the window. It had been there for 2 years, untouched. The label in the corner still bore the name of my mother's attorney, printed in a formal serif font that somehow always made me feel like a child being summoned to the principal's office. I hadn't opened it when it arrived. Back then, I told myself I didn't need what was inside, that I wanted peace more than closure, that nothing in that envelope could change what I'd already lost. But now, with the storm Valora had stirred, and the digital crowd still howling outside my door, I knew the truth. My avoidance had been protection, and protection wasn't the same as healing. I peeled the flap open slowly and slid out the documents. The first few pages were boilerplate, death certificate, estate tax forms. Then came the will. At the top of the draft, in our mother's delicate script, were both our names, Aveline and Valora. Equal, side by side. But as I kept reading, I saw it. The revision date. 1 week before she passed. The final notarized copy, clean and cold, listed only one heir, Valora Madsen. My name was gone. No explanation, no footnote, just gone. A sharp exhale escaped me, though I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I flipped back to the original draft, reread it to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. She had removed me legally while I was sitting at her bedside, updating her pain med schedule and calling the insurance company for the 5th time that week. It wasn't just about money. It was about narrative, about who deserved to hold the family name, about who got to inherit history, not just the house or the jewelry, but the story of who we were. And Valora had decided it wasn't me. I sat with the papers in my lap for a long while, letting the weight of the pages press down on my knees. Then I got up and poured myself a glass of water, pacing the length of the living room like I used to when I was cramming for finals. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up and opened Instagram, half on autopilot. There it was. A new post from Valora. A close-up shot of the necklace. The one with the rose gold intertwined rings our mother had given us at that brunch 3 years ago. The caption read, "Callum gave me this when I opened my first boutique. He said it reminded him of how far we'd come." There was even a heart emoji. I zoomed in. The design was unmistakable. I knew every curve of that necklace. I had touched it the morning of the brunch when Mom called us over with a little box and said, "For both of you, because I'm proud of both of you, and because I want you to remember, this is shared." But Valora had taken it, and within minutes of that gift being unwrapped, told the rest of the table it was from Callum. I'd let it slide then. I didn't want to embarrass her, didn't want to ruin the moment. I had thought it didn't matter who got credit, but now I saw it clearly. This wasn't just theft, it was rebranding. She had taken the object, rewritten its origin, and used it as a prop in the glossy storyline of her curated life. That necklace was supposed to be a bridge between us, and she had paved over it with lies and filters. I reopened my laptop. The Dropbox link was still there. I clicked New Email and typed out a subject line, "Not just a necklace." In the body of the email, I attached a photo of the original necklace taken at that brunch, the original draft of the will with both our names, a screenshot of Valora's new Instagram post, a copy of the gift letter Mom had written in her own hand. I addressed it to Malis Trent, the journalist. Then I wrote, just below the attachments. She turned inheritance into image, but she forgot that stories carry receipts too. I stared at the screen a moment longer, then hit send. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt accurate. Valora had spent years collecting things and erasing context. She didn't want family. She wanted an origin myth, one where she rose alone, struggled alone, triumphed alone. But I'd been there the whole time. I held the proof. She repackaged what was ours into what was hers. Let's see how well it sells when the truth is back in stock. The morning I returned to De La Vigne, the sky was overcast. Not stormy, just uncertain. Like the weather couldn't make up its mind. I didn't dress up. I didn't curl my hair. I didn't wear anything that sparkled or shouted. Just black slacks, a clean blouse, and my mother's old watch. It hadn't worked in years, but I wore it anyway. Not for time, but for memory. When I pushed through the boutique doors, the first thing I noticed was the shift in temperature. Not physical, but human. Last time, they barely saw me. This time, they all saw me. And they were careful. The woman at the reception desk offered me water with too many ma'ams. The manager who once avoided eye contact now said my name with over-enunciated warmth, like he was trying to erase something by overcorrecting. "We're glad to have you back, Ms. Baird," he said, folding his hands like a waiter, trying to earn back a lost tip. "Would you like to browse the—" "No," I said gently. "I'll wait." And I did. A few minutes later, she arrived. Valora. She walked in like nothing had happened, like the internet hadn't dissected her for 2 days straight, like her version of the story hadn't unraveled in 1,000 retweets and video stitches. She wore white again. She always wore white when she wanted to seem untouched. She brought 2 influencers with her this time, women I recognized from her social circle, all teeth and heels and curated femininity. They laughed too loud, overcompensating, always a tell. Our eyes met. She didn't speak, not to me. But her smile dipped a fraction, just enough to say, "You don't control this room." And then the boutique doors opened again. No chime, no announcement, just presence. Callum walked in without warning, not flanked by PR. No assistants, no theatrics, just him. In a gray suit, no tie. His expression wasn't cold. It was measured, sharp, like he had done his homework. Valora straightened up as if she'd been caught in a lie, but wasn't ready to admit which one. "Callum," she said, stepping forward. "I didn't know you were coming." He didn't answer her. Instead, he walked directly to the head sales manager, who, to his credit, didn't faint. "I want to see the most expensive item in the store," Callum said evenly. "Now." The man blinked, nodded, and rushed away. In the corner, a woman holding her purse clutched her phone tighter. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another replied, "It's her husband." Valora's face held, but I saw the first crack, right around her eyes. The manager returned with a velvet tray, trembling slightly. On it sat the crown jewel of De La Vigne, the diamond necklace. Its centerpiece sparkled under the lights, like it had been waiting for this very moment. The entire boutique leaned in, some physically, others with breath held behind glossed lips. Callum didn't even look at it. He turned to me. "Try it on!" My heart skipped. I didn't move right away. I wasn't sure what was happening. I wasn't sure why he was doing this, until I saw Valora's hands curl around the sides of her designer clutch. She stepped forward. "This is absurd," she said, voice sharp. "That's mine. You got it for me." Callum turned to her then, fully, calmly. "I got it for the woman who understood value," he said. "Not vanity." Valora blinked like she'd been slapped. Not loudly, not violently, but precisely. He turned back to me and gently lifted the necklace from the tray. He stepped closer, pausing just long enough for me to give consent. Not with words, but with stillness. He fastened it around my neck with the kind of care you reserve for things that matter. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, wearing not just diamonds, but truth. "You always needed shine," I said softly. I learned how to reflect. Silence. Then whispers. So many whispers. That's her, someone said. The sister. She didn't even raise her voice. Another voice, almost in awe. Valora just lost her crown. The boutique's Instagram Live, accidentally still running on a tablet left near the register, was capturing every second. I didn't need to post. I didn't need to defend. I was simply present. Valora backed away slowly, like the air had shifted and she couldn't breathe in it anymore. The influencers who came with her, they found sudden interest in a display case across the room. Their laughter quieted. Their phones stayed down. No selfies now. Not in this light. I turned to the manager. "Thank you," I said, adjusting the necklace with a single touch. He nodded, his posture half a bow. I walked out of the boutique with no applause, no music. Just a quiet knowing that something had changed. She wanted luxury to validate her. I let silence do it for me. I didn't check my phone that night. I left it face down on the kitchen counter and made a cup of mint tea instead. I stood at the window while the water boiled, watching headlights glide past on the street below like slow-moving thoughts I didn't want to catch. I needed the quiet to linger, if only for a few more hours. It had taken years to reclaim my voice. I wasn't about to give it away in the comments section. But the next morning, the world knocked on my door, and it didn't wait for an invitation. My name was trending, not for scandal, not for shame, but for stillness. Woman holds composure, while sister humiliates her in 12 Minoners boutique standoff. She stood like a verdict, not a victim. She wore dignity like it was couture. I blinked at the headlines, unsure if I was still asleep, but the emails pouring into my inbox said otherwise. Journalists, bloggers, a friend I hadn't heard from since high school, a woman from Oregon who just wanted to say, "Thank you for showing me that not fighting back doesn't mean losing." The boutique's Instagram page had gone into lockdown. The comments on Valora's most recent post, where she smiled with that necklace, falsely claiming it as a gift from her husband, had turned into a battlefield. Some people defended her, of course. Image has a long shelf life. But most saw through it now. Someone had clipped the live stream footage, where Callum walked in, where he said plainly, "I got it for the woman who understood value, not vanity." That single line had become a meme, a tweet, a TikTok trend. And Valora's face at that moment, caught mid-smirk, frozen like a statue just before it cracks, was everywhere. Luxury doesn't make you noble. Callum knew the difference. Some people wear diamonds. Some people reflect them. In 48 hours, the boutique's rating dropped from 4.9 to 2.3 stars. Influencer tags were removed. A video compilation popped up showing Valora dismissing service staff at events, giving fake cries during charity panels, and refusing to answer a question about her humble beginnings. I didn't post a thing. I didn't comment. I didn't retweet. I just sat on my couch in my quiet apartment, barefoot, sipping coffee, and reading what people were finally seeing for themselves. The truth doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes, it just has to stand still long enough to let the lie run out of breath. Later that afternoon, I went to the coffee shop near Pasadena Community College. I needed air, familiar faces, a place where nobody cared if you wore designer or not. I hadn't been there in a while, but the barista still remembered my order. Black coffee, 2 ice cubes, no cream. I was stirring in a dash of cinnamon when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Ms. Baird?" I turned and saw a woman, mid-20s, curly hair pulled into a bun, eyes wide with recognition. "I'm Narina," she said quickly. "Narina Hodge. You probably don't remember me. I was in your creative writing class, sophomore year. You helped me get my first story published in the school paper." I blinked, then smiled. "Of course I remember you. You wrote that piece about your grandmother's quilt collection." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I saw the video. I saw everything. And I just wanted to say, I saw what they did to you. But the way you stood there, you rewrote it in real time." She paused, then added, You taught me that stories matter. I never forgot that. My throat tightened, not from pain, from release. Sometimes the past you thought had drifted out of reach comes back, not to haunt you, but to hug you. Narina reached into her tote bag. I work for a small publishing house now, junior editor. My boss saw your name in the news. He watched the video. He asked me if I knew you. And? I asked, eyebrows raised. I said, she's the kind of voice the world forgot, but now desperately needs. And he wants to meet with you. If you're open to it. No pressure, of course. I let out a small laugh. Genuine, surprised. You just made my entire week, Narina. She blushed. No, you made mine. Years ago. She gave me her card and promised to email me by end of day. Then she left, as quickly as she appeared, waving over her shoulder like we'd just finished class. I sat there a long while, watching the swirl of cream in someone else's coffee, letting the noise of the cafe settle around me like a safe blanket. I hadn't asked for recognition, but maybe that's the point. The loudest echoes come when you stop trying to make a sound. That evening, I scrolled through more coverage, this time as an observer, not a target. Fashion columnists were questioning the industry's obsession with aesthetic over authenticity. A YouTube commentary channel did a full breakdown of the Baird Greaves Boutique Showdown and ended with, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't raise her voice. Refund requests hit the boutique's inbox like a storm. Sponsors quietly distanced themselves from Valora. A quote from her old interview began circulating as irony. If I ever fall, it'll be because I tripped over my own success. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't justice in the legal sense. No subpoenas, no settlements. This was justice by witness. And I didn't share my story. I just stood in it. And somehow, that was enough for the world to see what she'd painted over. She curated an image. I lived a truth. And now, the world had chosen which to believe. The quiet that followed wasn't a peaceful one. It was the kind that hums in your ears like leftover electricity after a storm has passed. You know something has shifted, but the room looks the same, at least on the surface. 2 mornings after the boutique incident, I met Callum at his office in downtown Los Angeles. He had requested the meeting himself, said it wouldn't take long. I said I didn't need closure. He said this wasn't about closure, it was about clarity. His office was just as I remembered from years ago, clean, minimal, intentionally cold. The kind of space where people wear restraint like armor. The legal assistant greeted me with a name I hadn't heard in weeks, Ms. Baird. But this time, it came without hesitation or side-eye. Callum met me at the glass door. No handshake, just a nod. Thank you for coming. I followed him down the corridor to a smaller conference room where a tablet and a printed packet sat waiting. No coffee, no folder labeled for review, just facts. I had our legal team do a deep audit, he said, taking a seat across from me. Everything from the company's founding to the early bridge loans. I wanted to understand where things went wrong, not emotionally, on paper. He slid the packet toward me, the edge catching against the grain of the table like it didn't want to move. Inside, my name sat bold and unmistakable. A founding guarantee letter, my signature, the date, the wire confirmation from my old bank account. I was listed as a provisional investor, part of the original financial scaffolding that helped Callum's startup stay afloat when other funding fell through. But then, a small footnote at the bottom, ownership status voided upon failure to appear for formal sign-off. Callum spoke before I could. That sign-off meeting was scheduled while you were in Oregon with your mother. It was never rescheduled. I nodded slowly. Valora said you didn't need me there, that you had it handled. He leaned back, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I believed her. We sat in silence. He added more softly this time. It's legally gray, but ethically, it's damning. I closed the folder and didn't touch the tablet. I didn't need more PDFs to confirm what I'd already known in my bones for years. I don't need you to fix it, I said. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. He gave me a look, half apology, half respect. You weren't. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, my fingers tracing the edge of a file I'd nearly thrown out last spring. It had survived 6 apartment moves and at least 3 attempts at decluttering. Inside, it was a boutique receipt from 2 decades ago. I had bought the necklace on a rainy Tuesday when I was 23. It was my first big purchase after landing a salaried job. The saleswoman wrapped it like it was meant for someone else, someone fancier, but I'd worn it out of the store, proud and certain that one day I'd give it to someone who would never forget its meaning. I stared at the faded ink, my own signature at the bottom, and the address on the line above it. My old apartment in Silver Lake. Not Valora's. Mine. That necklace had never been hers. Not by price, not by story. Now I understood why she had erased the engraving on the back. For my daughters, MM. It hadn't matched the fiction she was selling. I scanned the receipt, uploaded it along with the founding doc into a folder I labeled, "Ownership is more than paper." I wrote one sentence on a Post-it and stuck it to my desk lamp. You don't win truth, you verify it. The next morning, I emailed everything, not to Malis this time, to a short list of journalists, lawyers, industry contacts who'd once sung Valora's praises. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't rant. I just sent documents. Let them speak. While the emails flew off silently, something else happened in the background. Valora's PR inbox lit up like Christmas in reverse. Anonymous tips flooded the boutique's board. The boutique's general counsel received a memo from a retail ethics watchdog questioning the legitimacy of Valora's brand origin stories. And while I made breakfast in my small Pasadena kitchen, scrambled eggs, toast, nothing fancy, news trickled into the public. First, one of her sponsors announced they were reevaluating their collaboration. Then, a podcast episode aired, breaking down the inconsistencies in her business timeline, the redacted documents in archived press kits. Fashion bloggers began stitching together screenshots and timelines like detectives with digital yarn. She had built her empire on being the woman who rose from nothing. The world was now learning how many hands she'd stepped on while climbing. And I hadn't said a word. I didn't have to. She crafted her image like silk, smooth, expensive, elegant. But I held facts like glass. Fragile, maybe, but they reflected everything. And now, finally, they were being seen. She built her success on forgetfulness. I kept receipts. Callum's office hadn't changed much. Neither had he. Always calm, always calculated. But that morning, he looked like someone who'd finally decided to stop pretending he couldn't see the fire across the street. The room was quiet when I walked in, sunlight bleeding through the blinds just enough to make everything feel realer than I wanted. He didn't stand to greet me, just motioned to the seat across from him, like we were equals in a matter neither of us fully controlled. I started looking into things after our last meeting, he said, not wasting a breath. Honestly, I started before that, months ago. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I didn't tell you then because I wasn't sure what I'd find, and because I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. There was a pause, and in it, I could hear the weight of what came next. Callum turned his screen toward me and tapped the keyboard. Here, he said. Financials, emails, archive pulls from the PR team. Valora's name is everywhere, but yours, scrubbed, even from places where you were quoted. My throat tightened. She had her name inserted into original pitch decks you helped write, removed yours from press kits, blog posts, even the podcast episode you guest spoke on back in 2018. I blinked. The one on first-gen entrepreneurs? He nodded. They re-released it 2 years later under her voice only, edited out your segment entirely. I sat back. There it was. Not a metaphor, not a hunch, just fact. He clicked again. And then there's this. Private account transfers from the boutique's marketing budget to a shell firm. She listed them as consultant payments. No consultant exists. I felt nothing, not even surprise, just confirmation. She didn't lose her way, I said. She never wanted to share the map. Callum rubbed his jaw. I stayed quiet longer than I should have. I wanted to believe she was just ambitious. No, I said. She was deliberate. On the table between us sat my silence. Years of it. Neatly folded. He gave me a number, a quiet settlement figure. I declined. I didn't need hush money. I had my own voice now. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. A call from Milas. I answered, and her voice came through steady, clear, like someone who had waited long enough. You still want me to publish the story? I paused at the elevator, pressed the button, watched it light up. Yes, I said. Use the documents, but leave my name out of the headline. Understood, she said. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment. A voicemail draft blinked at me from my phone, one I'd written for Valora but never sent. It started with, I miss the way we were, and ended with too many ellipses to be honest. I deleted it. That version of her, the one I missed, only ever lived in my head. And even in memory, she demanded center stage. I clicked open a new file and began writing again. Not for publishing, not for public read, just for me. A simple line repeated itself in my head. She didn't lose me, she lost access. 2 days later, I was invited to speak at a Women in Publishing event at a local nonprofit library. Nothing big. A folded chair on a community center stage. I wore jeans, a soft sweater, and the smallest pair of earrings I owned. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to be honest. My speech wasn't long. I talked about women who write but are never credited, women who edit behind the scenes, women who stay in drafts and get erased in the final version. I said, you're not invisible, they just don't know how to look at you without guilt. The room clapped, small but heartfelt, and as I stepped down, I saw her, Valora, alone. No glam squad, no camera crew, just her, in a pale coat too tight across the shoulders, standing by the exit like she'd wandered into the wrong story. I didn't approach her. She did. I never expected you to win, she said quietly. I didn't, I replied. I just stopped playing your game. She opened her mouth like she might explain, might apologize. I held up a hand, not with anger, but with finality. This isn't anger, I said. It's absence. I no longer orbit your gravity. She looked like someone who couldn't find her script. I walked past her. The door opened with a squeak and shut without echo. She didn't lose me to bitterness. She lost me to peace. The next morning, I woke early without an alarm. The house was still, the kind of still that doesn't demand your attention. It offers it. Light slipped gently through the sheer curtains of my office, casting long stripes across the desk, where my tea sat cooling beside a small stack of mail. Among the envelopes, I found a handwritten note folded carefully between a publishing catalog and a flyer from the local co-op. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting wasn't. Narina's. Inside, a single page. Ink slightly smudged, like she'd written it quickly but meant every word. Thank you for reminding me that dignity doesn't shout, it just outlasts the noise. I read it twice, then folded it again and placed it in the box I kept in the closet labeled kept, not shared. That box had grown over the years, not just in size, but in weight. It held words that hadn't needed to go viral, gestures that hadn't needed an audience. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I was finally at peace, the kind that doesn't knock you over, the kind that holds your shoulders straight and lets you breathe deeper. Later that week, I received a quiet email from the City Museum. They were putting together a small exhibit titled Women and Legacy: What We Carry Forward. A curator had come across my essay on ethical authorship and wanted to feature a few of my personal artifacts, if I was willing. I didn't ask who tipped them off. I had a guess. The day I visited the exhibit, it was already open to the public. No ribbon cutting, no gala. Just a few careful displays lining a modest room with muted lighting and warm-toned walls. In one glass case sat my first annotated manuscript, margins full of second thoughts and stubborn confidence. Beside it, the boutique receipt I had once found tucked between old bank statements. My name, still faded but legible, alongside the necklace listing. And then, in the center, the necklace itself. It didn't glitter under the spotlight. It didn't command attention. It rested, quiet, resolute. A small plaque underneath read, "Gifted, erased, reclaimed." There was no mention of Valora, no timeline of scandal, just facts, just a corrected ledger of what mattered. I stood there for a while, not looking at the necklace, but at the faces of the people reading the plaque. A teenager in a denim jacket tilted her head and whispered to her friend, "I like that. Not everything has to be loud to be strong." I smiled. I wasn't proud because it hurt to get here. I was proud because I didn't take shortcuts, because even when I was written out, I never stopped remembering where I'd been. A few days later, I found myself at the stone bench on the hill overlooking Pasadena. It was where my mother used to sit after walks, sip her coffee, and talk to the sky like it was an old friend. I hadn't been back in years. In my hand, I held a plain envelope. No address, no stamp, just her name written across the front in my own steady handwriting. Inside, one line. "You needed that necklace to feel worth." I never did. I left it under the bench, pressed between the pages of a book we both used to love, its cover sun-bleached, its spine softened with time. Then I walked away. Not with victory, with oxygen, with space that no longer had to hold the weight of her disappointment or my longing for something that never truly existed. On the way home, I passed by a bookstore I hadn't noticed before. A sign in the window read, "Local Voices Matter." Something about the phrase felt like permission, maybe even invitation. When I got back, I sat down at my desk, opened a new document, and began typing. Not about Valora, not about the boutique, just beginnings. The kind that don't require revenge or spotlight, the kind that stretch forward instead of circling back. Family can break you. Family can heal you. Family can also free you. Sometimes the same people do all three. She kept the spotlight, I kept the story, and now both are where they belong. Hi, my name's Aurelia, and this isn't just a story about a ripped dress. It's about the sister who smiled while tearing it, in front of 300 people. It's about the parents who called her the real star, even as I stood beside them, invisible. It's about the room full of guests who clapped for a lie they didn't care to question, until it unraveled in front of them. And when the truth came out, she didn't just fall from grace, she begged my husband, the man she once told me wasn't my league, to make it all go away. But what happens to a family when shame is staged, and justice is silent but seen? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have done what I did? I arrived alone. Carnegie Mansion stood as proud as ever under the early spring sky. Classic, aloof, dressed in white light and old money. The doorman gave me a half smile as I passed. I clutched my evening bag tight, felt the chill graze my bare shoulders despite the long sleeves of the cream silk gown I'd chosen. The kind that whispers quiet power, not screams for attention. I knew I'd made the right choice when I stepped through the grand foyer and saw her, Callista. She was magnetic as ever, red satin dress, dramatic curls, eyes darting like she was scanning for cameras instead of people. My mother and father were already there, glasses raised, floating beside her like ornaments. My heels clicked once, twice, on the marble, and then I paused. Mom glanced my way, a flicker of recognition, a millisecond of possibility. But then she smiled wide. At Callista. "Sweetheart, you look like a movie star tonight. They're going to think you're the face of this whole event." Callista laughed like it was modesty, not confirmation. Dad leaned in for a kiss on her cheek. Mom linked arms with her. Just like that, the tableau was complete. A picture-perfect family moment. Except for me. 10 feet away, not a part of the frame. I pressed my lips together and stared at my phone screen, pretending to read a non-existent message. I wasn't surprised, I thought. But that didn't stop the sting. A daughter's place. Sometimes it's not even in the family photo, especially when she refuses to play the part written for her. At the check-in table, I gave my name. Dr. Aurelia Bennett, I said, softly but clearly. The woman behind the table nodded, rifled through the boxes, and handed me my name badge. Dr. A. Bennett, board chair. My work, my title, 10 years of research, meetings, policy revisions, and endless nights compiling the Foundation's bylaws. I slipped the badge into my clutch. I didn't want it to snag the silk. I made my way toward the main hall, where the lighting had been softened to a honeyed glow. My heels found the rhythm of the polished floors, and I took in the muted hum of champagne flutes, polite laughter, and curated compliments. That's when Callista found me. She slid up beside me like she'd been waiting. "Hey, sis," she said, voice syrupy sweet, arms open for a hug. I hesitated, then leaned in. She squeezed tightly. Too tightly. "Good to see you here," she whispered into my ear. "You'll love the step and repeat wall. They're using the red backdrop. You know, the one that makes pale skin look washed out?" I smiled coolly. Then she was gone. 10 minutes later, applause erupted across the ballroom. I turned to look. The step and repeat was lit up, and standing under the spotlight, soaking it all in, was Callista, wearing my badge. Dr. A. Bennett, board chair. The MC's voice rang out. "And here's one of our shining supporters and leaders, Callista Bennett, ladies and gentlemen." Cameras flashed like summer lightning. Reporters called her name. She posed, she laughed, she waved. I stood at the edge of the bar, holding a flute of sparkling water I hadn't tasted. It wasn't theft, it was choreography. One hug, one swipe, one flash. A decade of my work vanished behind someone else's lashes and lipstick. I thought of saying something, but then I remembered something even more important, saying it doesn't always make people hear you. So I watched and waited. The crowd parted around her like she was royalty, and in that moment, she was. No one questioned it, not a single person. I took a breath, steadying myself. Later that evening, as I moved toward the ballroom entrance, I caught a fragment of a conversation. My mother's voice, soft and pointed. She was always the star. Even Malcolm saw it first. My steps faltered. Not because it hurt. I had grown used to that, but because even after all these years, she still believed it. I didn't stop walking when I heard her say it. I didn't look back. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But I felt it, like a pin pressed to the center of my spine. Not sharp enough to wound, but deep enough to remind me I'd never quite been enough for her. Not bright enough, not loud enough, not Callista. Inside the ballroom, the air had thickened with floral perfume and the rising pitch of clinking glassware. Guests shuffled between stations. Cheese towers, dessert platters, signature cocktails lined up in rows of sparkling temptation. The lighting was lower now, amber and soft, like it was trying to convince us the night still had warmth left to offer. I hovered near the dessert table, more for the illusion of purpose than any desire to indulge. I wasn't hungry. I was watching, strategically, subtly, learning who was watching who. That's when I heard her. "You went with the sapphire, huh?" Callista's voice, smooth and intentional, floated past my ear before she did. She stopped just beside me, not facing me, but speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to catch every word. "Bold choice," she added, dipping her fork into a raspberry tart. "Thought you hated drawing attention. Or is it different now that you married into a bank account?" The woman next to her stifled a laugh behind a flute of Prosecco. Another one raised an eyebrow, but didn't look surprised. I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze head-on. She looked pleased with herself, like a cat who'd pawed the goldfish bowl just enough to make it ripple. "That's the problem with you, Cal," I said, letting the words rest, low and steady. You think visibility is the same as power." She didn't reply, but the smile that once curled across her lips fell, just slightly, enough for me to notice, enough for the woman behind her to look away, unsure whose side she wanted to be seen on. I walked off before she could reclaim the moment. Half an hour later, I found myself passing the reception desk again, on my way toward the south corridor. I was hoping to step outside, breathe something that didn't taste like money or vanity. But then I heard my mother's voice. Low, intimate, like she thought the hallway would shield her. "She always struggles with nights like this," she said to a woman I recognized but couldn't quite place. Tall, elegant, name on every society page. Fiona, I realized. Fiona Marks, the columnist whose op-eds could kill or crown a career. "Too many people, too much elegance," Mom went on. "Callista thrives in this world. Aurelia just tries to survive it." Fiona hesitated. "But she's the co-founder of the STEM initiative, isn't she?" My mother smiled faintly. That polished, practiced expression that always said too much without sounding like anything at all. "Yes," she said. "But sometimes it's better to let the spotlight rest on the one who knows how to hold it." That did it. It wasn't the words. It was the certainty in her voice, the way she spoke like it was fact, not opinion. Like this was the family memo I'd just never received. I stepped back, letting a few guests pass between us, and pulled out my phone. Not to check anything, but to center myself. They'd written me out of the narrative without even blinking. Not out of malice, not even jealousy, out of preference. That was worse. I returned to the ballroom with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not the quiet of someone defeated, but the clarity of someone done waiting for rescue. Malcolm had asked me once why I rarely spoke up when my sister overstepped. I'd said, "Because it doesn't matter to them." I was wrong. It hadn't mattered because I hadn't made it matter. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room like silk dropped from the rafters. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused mid-air. The MC stepped onto the stage, beaming like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "And to help introduce tonight's keynote speaker," he announced, "please welcome the Bennett family's shining star, Callista Bennett." The spotlight clicked on. She stepped out, smiling like she owned the air we all breathed. And maybe she did, but not for much longer. I stepped outside the ballroom, into a quieter corridor that curved toward a balcony no one used unless they needed air or escape. The light changed out here. Less gold, more slate, cooler on the skin, easier on the nerves. The air was different too. It didn't carry perfume or laughter, just the faint scent of rain still clinging to the stone. I gripped the railing, fingers resting on cold metal. I couldn't see Callista from here, but I could hear the echo of her voice inside. The crowd was still reacting to her, eating out of her palm like trained animals. They always did. It was strange what that moment dredged up. Not anger, not even jealousy. Memory. A summer afternoon. I was 16. Our living room was buzzing with women. Mom's garden club, bridge friends, someone from her book circle. Callista had just been accepted to Columbia. They were celebrating her before she even finished high school. I walked in holding a folder. I'd gotten an early internship at the city library. Nothing glamorous, but it meant something to me. I opened my mouth to share. Then I heard my mother. "Honestly," she said, wine glass in hand, "we didn't plan for another after Callista. But what do? You adjust. She's a sweet girl, but not the same cloth." The room chuckled politely. Not maliciously, just in agreement. I didn't drop the folder. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked back down the hall and shut my bedroom door. It's funny how you forget what day of the week it was, but never the exact words. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't supposed to be heard in every room, that doing the work quietly had its own dignity. But tonight, hearing Callista introduced with my title, while I stood with my name stripped from the program, it wasn't just history repeating. It was proof that they had never stopped choosing her. I looked out over the garden, the lights from the ballroom flickering on the stone below. I'd helped fund the restoration of those steps, wrote the grant myself, but my name was nowhere near the plaque. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. What I felt was colder, older, the kind of pain that wasn't fresh, but foundational. Behind me, the doors creaked slightly. I turned, expecting a waiter, but it was one of the younger foundation assistants. Chloe, I think her name was. She was maybe 24, trying to play it cool in borrowed heels. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, "you're the reason I donated, not her. People notice the real work, even if your family doesn't." My mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Not because I was shocked, because I believed her. I stepped back into the ballroom just in time for the lights to rise again. Dinner had been served, drinks refreshed, and laughter renewed like someone had hit the reset button. I returned to my table, quietly as always, while Callista's voice echoed from the stage behind me. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I could map the rhythm of her tone without turning around. Bright, falsely modest, deliberately disarming. Every time she paused for a laugh or looked coyly at the camera, I could tell. She wasn't just performing for the audience, she was rewriting the entire narrative. Then the lights dimmed again, and the large screen behind the stage flickered to life. A montage began, footage of community STEM camps, young girls coding, building solar-powered prototypes. Voices layered softly beneath it, talking about progress and purpose. I knew those faces. I remembered every girl, every weekend I gave up, every grant I'd fought to get funded. This was my work, my hands, my team, my fight. But I wasn't in the video. Then, as the last voice faded out, a final image filled the screen. Callista, crouched beside a group of smiling girls, one hand on a robot, the other holding a child's shoulder like she'd coached them through rocket science herself. And beneath it, the words, "Brought to life by Callista Bennett, advocate, innovator, visionary." Applause exploded. I didn't stand. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. The MC's voice rang out with confidence. What a radiant symbol of how grace and beauty can also mean bold leadership. I placed my fork down precisely with both hands. My water glass stayed full. My mouth stayed closed. In that moment, I didn't want to be seen. I wanted the lie to stop breathing. I took a breath, steadying my heart against the rising pulse in my neck. Across the room, at the VIP table, I spotted Callista holding court. She laughed in a way that only people who've never worked hard for anything can laugh, loose and loud, like nothing could touch her. Then, casually, she reached for her phone and held it up for her table to see. "It's a throwback," she said, grinning. "Wait for it." A short clip played, projected directly from her screen. It was grainy, jerky, the kind of footage someone took in high school when they were trying to be clever. I was in it, 16, mid-argument with a teacher over a literature assignment I'd challenged. My voice was sharp, my body language defiant. I looked fierce, but out of context, I looked unhinged. The caption scrawled across the bottom of the video, "She always had a strong tone." Laughter floated over the table like cheap perfume. One woman, someone from a media outlet, glanced at me, then quickly away, embarrassed for both of us. Callista caught my eye and raised her glass slightly, toasting me with a wink. My fingers curled under the table. I didn't clench them, I didn't move, but something in me clicked. Some people use knives, others use a lens. The damage feels the same. I rose from my chair, calm and measured, and stepped out of the dining area. As I walked, I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved with deliberate grace, opening a message thread I hadn't touched in months. I typed one line. "How quickly can you retrieve copyright proof for unpublished footage?" Then I hit send. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the rooftop lounge, the cold had settled just enough to feel it in my collarbones. Not unpleasant, just bracing. The sky above Manhattan had turned the kind of blue that happens right before the night finally gives up and becomes black. Below, the din of the ballroom felt distant, detached, like the noise belonged to someone else's life. Here, people weren't dancing, they were dealing, power in cocktail dresses, secrets exchanged in half-whispers over stemless wine glasses. This was where image became legacy, and reputation wasn't earned. It was traded. I found a quiet corner near a heating lamp and leaned against the marble railing. Before I could exhale, a woman I didn't recognize approached. Small frame, tablet in one hand, press badge on the other. "Dr. Bennett?" she asked, her tone clipped but not unkind. I nodded. She leaned in slightly. "I was hoping to confirm something, off record, of course," which meant very much on the record. "Callista mentioned," she continued, "that you had a medical procedure in your 20s, something to do with pregnancy complications." She said it lightly, like we were discussing a canceled hair appointment, like it was hers to know, hers to question, hers to define. And in that moment, it became clear. Callista wasn't just rewriting the past anymore. She was weaponizing it. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled out my clutch, unclasped it carefully, and retrieved a folded sheet of thick paper. The notary seal still shimmered faintly under the rooftop light. I handed it to the reporter. "It's confirmation of an egg donation I made when I was 26, I said, calm. "A friend needed help after chemo. There was no pregnancy, no trap, just science and compassion." She blinked. "I don't care if you use it," I added. "Or if you don't, I didn't do it for press, and I won't apologize for my body." She looked at the document, then back at me. Her voice softened. "Thank you for your time." I gave a small nod, then turned before she could find a way to make the moment hers. Inside, the mood had shifted slightly. The music remained light, but there was a tremor under it now, a buzz that hadn't been there before. Something had been said, or maybe just something had been seen. Callista was holding court again, laughing a little too hard, her group a little too rehearsed. I knew the signs. She was overperforming. When Callista turned into a show, it meant she was deflecting. I made my way toward the far end of the lounge, where a few high-top tables gave a view of the skyline. Before I reached it, I heard her voice again, louder this time, for effect. "Aurelia always found her purpose a bit late in life," she said, swirling her wine. "But hey, marrying Malcolm? That's a strategy, and clearly it's paying off." The laughter was immediate, but one woman didn't laugh. She spotted me first, standing in the fringe of the circle, coat draped over one shoulder, glass untouched in my hand. Her smile faltered. Then Callista saw me. Our eyes met. I stepped into the center without hesitation. "You're right," I said clearly. "I did choose stability, over spotlight, over performative drama. Malcolm didn't marry me for the headlines. He married me for the quiet rooms, the work, the things no one claps for." I let the silence hold for a beat. "He married me," I said, "for substance, which, as you can see tonight, is in short supply." No one moved. Then, somewhere near the bar, a glass clinked against another. Soft. Intentional. A few heads nodded. A quiet ripple moved through the group. Not thunderous, but enough to shift the air. Callista's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for her to recover. I walked past her, measured steps, no urgency, and let my fingers brush against the silver plaque mounted near the terrace exit. My name, engraved in clean serif font, Dr. Aurelia Bennett, endowment chair. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "They never needed to see me to know who built this." I moved back inside slowly, letting the door close behind me with a soft click. The hallway leading to the ballroom had thinned, waitstaff clearing empty glasses, couples pausing to check lipstick or loosen tight ties. I kept my pace even, nodding politely when necessary, but not stopping. As I entered the main space, the vibe had shifted. Gone was the earlier glow of admiration. Now it was a hum of curiosity, eyes darting, lips murmuring, phones up. The press had crept in closer. Lights weren't as soft anymore. I could feel the heat of attention without anyone calling my name. I walked past the edge of the lounge and paused when I heard her voice. Too familiar, too casual. "She's come far," Callista said to a man holding a camera rig, her tone falsely tender. "A few years ago, we weren't even sure she'd make it through recovery. But healing stories are powerful, right?" The man, young, sharp, a blogger with influence, nodded like he'd been handed gold. My body didn't move, but inside, something snapped like overstretched wire. Recovery? There had never been rehab. No therapy stint, no public breakdown. I'd had burnout once, yes, but it hadn't been a secret, and it hadn't required reinvention. What Callista had done in 10 words was worse than gossip. It was calculated storytelling. It was a smear wearing pearls. Then, like she'd sensed me, she turned. Our eyes met. And she smiled. Not the smile of a sister. The smile of a predator who just challenged you to blink first. I didn't. I stepped back quietly, took out my phone, and typed one line to Malcolm. "Prep legal for defamation exposure if this goes public. But don't act yet." Because it wasn't about my past anymore. It was about who got to write it. I headed toward the media alcove to retrieve a charger when I heard my name again, this time from a foundation assistant. "Dr. Bennett, there's someone at the investor table asking for you." I made my way there without hesitation. And then I saw him, Ryan Keel, of all people, all. He stood just as I arrived, like he'd been expecting this scene. His hair was shorter now, more controlled. But the grin? The grin hadn't aged a day. "Still hate Cabernet," he said, grinning. "I remember you tried it once. Threw up in my sink." Callista laughed from 3 seats down. Too loud, too fake. A man in a navy suit chuckled softly, unsure of what was happening. I nodded once. "Nice of you to fly in just to remind me of your plumbing," I said, letting my tone stay even. Ryan blinked. Then I turned to the others. "Let me know if he pitches crypto. He's due for a pivot." Laughter broke through the tension, not wild, but clear enough to separate us. A woman at the end of the table smiled behind her glass. Another looked away, embarrassed for him. Callista stiffened. I didn't bother staying. I turned and left, the sound of my heels muted by the carpet, but not by what I left behind. Halfway down the hallway, I paused at the edge of the catering corridor and checked my phone. A new message. Unknown number. "There's a video Callista doesn't want anyone to see. I have it. Meet me near the valet exit. Midnight." I stared at the screen, then slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. It wasn't fear I felt. It was momentum. I kept moving, back through the glowing corridors of the mansion. It was almost midnight, but the night refused to wind down. The energy had shifted. Less celebration, more calculation. It was the hour when reputations linger longer than the drinks, and the wrong whisper could last longer than the party. The ballroom had thinned just enough to make space between people, but not enough to escape the ever-hovering cameras. I passed a mirrored column and caught my reflection. Still composed. Still in control. But I could feel the sharpness in my steps now. Like something had hardened inside me. Like I had finally accepted that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And it needed to end. Near the networking lounge, I spotted Callista with her phone out. That was never good news. She had it angled perfectly, selfie mode, catching the soft backdrop of the chandelier glow and curated laughter. I recognized the tone of her voice even before I heard the words. "Hey guys," she purred into the stream. "Just thought I'd give you a peek at the magic tonight. Such a beautiful event. Oh, look!" She panned her phone slightly, to where I was walking past in the background. Some people show up to support, some just linger. But hey, let's give the quiet achievers a moment too. I didn't stop, but the damage was already live. I caught 2 guests pausing mid-conversation, eyes flitting between the screen and me. A reporter nearby raised his phone like he'd found gold. A notification pinged from the corner of someone else's feed. "Is that the sister who married the billionaire?" She looks uncomfortable. No, I didn't look uncomfortable. I looked done. I turned slightly and met the gaze of the camera, just for a second. Long enough to let her know I saw what she was doing, and I wasn't blinking anymore. She thought her audience was an army, but even mobs can be silenced when the truth is loud enough. I continued toward the bar, passing through clusters of small conversations, laughter that tasted like champagne and insincerity. Then, another flash of her voice behind me, louder this time, coming from one of her friends. "Careful," the woman said with a drunken chuckle. "She's going to ask us to rate her tray-carrying form next." Laughter erupted. Too loud, too rehearsed. Callista chimed in, her voice syrupy and sharp. "No, she'll probably file a patent for it." That's when a group of them, maybe 5 or 6, started mock-walking in a circle. Arms tucked in, eyes cast down, mimicking the way I moved through events with quiet efficiency. The lounge was suddenly too quiet and too loud at once. Then, out of nowhere, a teenage girl stepped forward. "Enough," she said, clear and unwavering. The room froze. "You're not edgy, you're mean." Callista's smile dropped for half a second. The girl stepped back, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. I looked at the girl. No older than 16, probably a donor's daughter in a borrowed dress and borrowed confidence. But in that moment, she was braver than anyone in that room had been all night. I nodded once to her. Not for her sake, for mine. Because the first crack never starts with a blow. It starts with someone else seeing it too. Callista recovered fast, of course. Laughed like it was all a joke that got away from them. But her eyes met mine, and I saw it. Not guilt, not shame, fear. I turned on my heel, leaving her in that silence, and headed toward the exit. The corridor smelled of lilies and waxed floors. Everything too polished, too curated. A place built to cover things, not confront them. At the door, a valet in a dark jacket stepped toward me quietly. He didn't speak. He simply extended his hand with a small envelope. Inside, a flash drive. No note. Just 3 words handwritten across the inner flap. Watch before dawn. Then decide what to burn. I didn't stop moving, not until I reached a quiet corner near the back entrance, where no one lingered anymore. I slipped the flash drive into my phone using the tiny adapter I always kept in my clutch. Old habit from managing Foundation press decks, not revenge fantasies. But life had a way of redefining usefulness. The file loaded quickly. No title screen, no dramatic music, just raw footage. A close-up shot, from above. Callista, in her silver gown. Behind me. She reached out, calmly, deliberately, and found the edge of my dress. Right where the fabric was double-stitched to hold weight. She didn't yank yet. Just pinched it, curled it between her fingers, then pulled, sharply. The video froze at that exact moment. The frame captured my shock. Her smirk. I didn't flinch, didn't press rewind. I just let it sit there in my palm like a truth too long silenced. It wasn't an accident. It was theater. I glanced up. The final toasts were beginning. The crowd had reassembled. Champagne flutes glittered under the chandeliers. Callista stood near the dance floor, surrounded again. They always surrounded her. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked across the room, my heels striking the marble harder than before. Intentional. I passed the stage tech near the AV booth and handed him my phone. "Project this," I said. "No volume needed." He blinked but didn't ask questions. Years in event work teaches obedience under pressure. The lights dimmed as another speech wrapped up. A guest raised a glass. Someone laughed too loud, and then the screen behind the stage lit up. The video played, no title, no introduction, just her. Pulling my dress. The room went dead silent. Gasps. Then silence again. Callista stepped forward, as if to protest. But mid-step, the seam of my gown tore slightly at the side. Not from the video. From her original tug. Someone screamed. Not in fear, but recognition. She did that on purpose. Flashbulbs erupted like a storm. One person dropped their glass. Another whispered something too fast to catch. But I stood still, center stage now. No microphone, no applause. Just truth. I walked up slowly, took the auxiliary cord from the AV assistant, and disconnected my phone. The screen went black. My voice didn't rise. I didn't perform. I didn't lecture. I just said, "This is what envy looks like when it runs out of lies." No one clapped. They didn't need to. Because when a room sees the thing you've been saying all along, silence is louder than standing ovations. Callista stood frozen, her hand still half raised, like she didn't know whether to explain or escape. No one moved toward her. She turned slowly and looked at me, but I didn't meet her eyes this time. I wasn't here to convince her of anything anymore. Malcolm stepped forward from the back. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He looked at the crowd. "I'll handle the legal side," he said, voice clear, measured. "But tonight, you all witnessed the truth." And just like that, the air in the room changed. Not because of him, but because of what had finally been seen. I returned just before sunrise. The mansion no longer shimmered. It sat heavy in the morning haze, like a house that had finally confessed to its own secrets. The courtyard was empty, save for 2 valets nursing coffee from paper cups, their jackets wrinkled, and their eyes tracking no one in particular. Inside, the lounge had been stripped of its sparkle. Chairs stacked, centerpieces boxed, the scent of leftover roses clinging to everything like memory. I wasn't here to linger. I just needed my folder, the one I'd left at the foundation booth near the registration table. But as I crossed the now bare ballroom, I noticed the staff glancing up at me, their conversations stalling mid-sentence. Not rudely, not even curiously, just differently. The hush wasn't cold. It wasn't polite either. It was a kind of recognition I hadn't earned from them before. One young man muttered, just loud enough for me to catch, "People finally know who the real star was." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I wasn't looking for applause anymore. I was looking for peace. Near the side doors, a tech assistant was packing equipment into a hard case. He looked up, then hesitated. "Dr. Bennett?" I nodded. He pulled something from his pocket, a flash drive with a bright red label. "There's something you should hear," he said. "From earlier. It was recorded accidentally. Lapel mic. We always keep the raw feeds for syncing." I took it gently. He added, "Already online." I found a chair near the corner, popped the drive into my phone, and slid on my headphones. The audio clicked on, muffled movement, background noise, and then her. Callista. "No, pull harder near the waist seam," she said, laughing under her breath. "If it tears there, she'll think it's her own weight. Trust me, the worse she looks, the better I shine." My breath didn't hitch. My hands didn't tremble. What I felt was beyond betrayal. It was clarity. The hashtag had already begun trending. Shakir ripped by blood. I stared at the words on screen, the comment threads unraveling beneath them. Some were cruel. Most were stunned. But one simply read, "She planned it. She planned it all." And for once, the world believed them. Not me. Her. A soft knock interrupted the storm in my earbuds. One of the event volunteers stood there, holding a slim envelope with my name written in pen. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick cream paper. "I laughed when she mocked you. I didn't stop her. But you stood taller than all of us. I'm sorry. You taught me something we weren't brave enough to learn." No name, just Marlene, table 6. I folded it carefully and placed it inside the flap of my binder. Not for revenge, not for memory. Just to know that someone, somewhere, had the courage to own their silence. It didn't undo what happened, but it acknowledged the wound. And that's where real healing always begins. I stood, gathered the last of my things, and took one long look around the ballroom. The same chandeliers, the same velvet ropes, but everything felt different now. Not because they changed, because I had. As I stepped out into the early light, my phone vibrated. A new message from Malcolm. "Board is meeting at 10. Your name is on every agenda. I smiled, not because it was unexpected, but because it was earned. The elevator opened directly into the boardroom on the 28th floor. Glass walls, chrome finishes, polished walnut table, all designed to intimidate without saying a word. But I wasn't here to be impressed. I was here to be clear. Malcolm was already seated at the head, hands clasped, eyes unreadable. The rest of the room filled quickly. Legal counsel to the left, media advisors to the right, a few family stakeholders looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I walked in without waiting for an introduction. No one stood, but no one spoke either. The VP of Legal tapped a folder against the table twice and began. Due to recent evidence of defamation, reputational harm, and intentional sabotage during a flagship philanthropic event under our brand, this meeting has been convened for emergency decisions regarding personnel and public positioning. She clicked a remote, and two screens behind her came to life. One showed the dress-ripping footage. The other, the audio recording of Callista's premeditated instructions. No, pull harder near the waist seam. The room didn't gasp this time. They already knew. Callista appeared on the large center monitor. Video linked in from wherever she had chosen to hole up. Her hair was pulled back, lips bare of gloss, eyes calculating. "I assume I'm not allowed to speak?" she said with a forced laugh. Malcolm didn't even look at her. He addressed the room. "She's not here to defend herself," he said. "She's here to hear the consequences." He gestured toward me without turning. "This company was built on integrity, and last night my wife restored it." I didn't blink. I didn't need to. He continued. "The public trusts what we build, what we support, who we stand behind, and we stand behind her." Silence. The kind that doesn't ask for applause, just agreement. The general counsel slid a document toward me. The signature page. Malcolm had already signed. 2 trustees had signed. 1 blank remained. "Effective immediately," he said, "Callista Bennett is removed from all legacy-facing initiatives, PR duties, and succession planning related to the Bennett Family Trust. Oversight of all philanthropic divisions will fall solely under Dr. Aurelia Bennett." A click echoed as I signed. 1 pen stroke, 1 line, 1 door closed. Callista's voice buzzed through the speakers, thin and small now. "You're ruining me for one bad night," I finally spoke. "You ruined you," I said, voice steady. "I just made sure people saw it." The video feed cut out. No one tried to bring it back. The meeting moved on, action items, media strategies, succession updates. It was oddly procedural, almost clinical. And yet, I felt every second settle into place like bricks forming something stronger. When it adjourned, the room stood slowly, gathering phones, folders, reputations. As I moved toward the exit, one of the senior board members, Reed Hammond, a man who hadn't said 10 words to me in 5 years, stepped closer. "There's a keynote opening at Aspen," he said quietly. "Policy forum. They're asking for someone unshakable." I raised an eyebrow. "And you said?" He smiled faintly. "Told them I'd ask the one woman who knows how to steady a storm without raising her voice." I nodded once, polite. Nothing smug, just calm. "Let them send details," I said. "And next time, don't wait so long to ask." 3 days after the boardroom meeting, I returned to something resembling a routine. The media had already shifted its attention to the next scandal. Social feeds that once buzzed with hashtags and outrage now circled back to vacation photos, brunch posts, and political hot takes. The world spun on. But inside my apartment, things moved slower. Intentionally so. My home office in Soho overlooked a quiet street where the honking died down after 4 p.m., and the light filtered through the sheer curtains like it respected boundaries. I sat at my desk, reviewing logistics for the foundation tour, sipping tea that had gone lukewarm hours ago. That's when the knock came. 3 soft taps. Not urgent, not rehearsed. I opened the door, and there she was. Callista. No entourage. No gloss. Her hair pulled back in a careless knot. Her face bare. Even her clothes, a wrinkled cardigan, jeans that didn't try, spoke louder than her lips did. She didn't wait to be invited in. She walked past me, dropped her handbag on the edge of my reading chair, and stood in the center of the room like she wasn't sure what to hold on to. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said finally, her voice cracking. I've always been the one they noticed." I didn't speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for what I said, for what I let them say, for what I made them believe." She sat down, not because I offered, but because her legs gave in. I remained standing. "I believe you," I said quietly, "but it doesn't change what it cost me." Her eyes met mine, glassier than I'd ever seen them, not angry, not manipulative, just tired. "So what now?" she asked, a note of desperation breaking through. "You just cut me out?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. "No," I said. "You did that when you tore more than my dress. I'm just not sewing it back together for you." She let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Then, without another word, she picked up her bag, walked to the door, and opened it herself. The hallway light fell across the floor, like a line neither of us was going to cross again. She paused, just long enough for me to see the part of her that wasn't ready to go. Then she stepped over it. The door clicked shut behind her. Soft, final. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I sat down at my desk, picked up a pen, and finished reviewing the travel schedule. There, on top of the folder, was a note from Malcolm. "The Foundation launch tour is yours to lead. First stop, DC. You were always the one they'd follow." The ballroom in DC was nothing like Carnegie Mansion, but it didn't need to be. It didn't shimmer with generational wealth or whisper history through marble columns. It was newer, sleek, modern, unapologetically practical. It was built for ideas, not illusions. And tonight, it was mine. 2 weeks had passed since the board meeting. The media storm had mostly quieted. Callista's name was still circulating in think pieces and industry newsletters, usually as a cautionary tale. But I'd stopped reading them. There was no satisfaction in watching someone fall apart. What mattered now was what came next. My steps echoed softly against the polished floor as I moved toward the stage, heart steady beneath the white gown I'd chosen carefully, intentionally. The same one she tore, not replaced, not hidden, repaired. The seam was still there, a faint line running diagonally across the left hip. But now it glimmered faintly with gold stitching. It didn't try to disappear. It leaned into the damage. Owned it. A few guests noticed as I walked past. Some whispered. One woman nodded, her eyes wet. Not pity, something else. Recognition, maybe. The lights dimmed, and I stepped onto the stage. My name flashed across the screen behind me. Dr. Aurelia Bennett, founder, Quiet Power STEM Initiative. Applause rose, warm, unforced, real. I approached the mic and adjusted it slightly. Then I looked out at the room. Mostly women, mostly tired. Teachers, policymakers, first-generation students. The kind of crowd that doesn't care what label's on your heels, only what you're standing for. I cleared my throat, spoke slowly. 2 weeks ago, the world saw a video. A dress torn in public. A moment that was never meant to happen, but did. And in that moment, many people focused on the rip. I paused, let the silence settle. But what stayed with me wasn't the tear. It was what came after, the stitch, the choice to mend instead of replace. Because dignity doesn't depend on their silence, it lives in our voice. The screen behind me changed. Side by side, the viral photo from the gala and a new image, the plaque from the foundation wall, my name etched cleanly beneath it. The audience exhaled as one. And then came the clapping. Not polite, not forced. True. Somewhere near the third row, a girl no older than 15 wiped her eyes. I locked eyes with her for half a second, then looked away. so she could hold that moment as hers. Backstage, after the lights cooled and the seats emptied, I found a small envelope tucked under my speech notes. No postage, no return address. Inside was a letterhead from the Aspen Institute, just 2 sentences. You are confirmed to lead our upcoming global policy panel. We need your clarity now more than ever. Beneath it, in blue ink, someone had handwritten, "They were right. You are unshakable." Before I could fold it away, one of the interns ran up, breathless. "Dr. Bennett, do you have a second? There's someone who wants to meet you." I followed her around the corner to the back gallery. A cluster of students was waiting, notebooks clutched, eyes wide. One girl stepped forward. Her voice trembled. "I want to grow up to be the kind of woman who speaks with her eyes first, just like you." I didn't correct her, didn't tell her how often I'd failed at that exact thing. Instead, I touched her shoulder lightly. "Then you already are." As I gathered my coat and stepped into the night, my phone buzzed. A text from Malcolm. "Come home, the world sees you now." But I always did. I stood for a moment under the DC sky, the wind tugging gently at my coat, the seam of my gown brushing against my leg like a quiet reminder. Some things tear, but the right ones, the ones built with purpose, they hold.